What if you met yourself on the street and didn't like them? Not because they were rude, not because they did something cruel, just something about them disturbed you. The way they talked, the way they looked at you. Something too familiar, something slightly off. You try to shake the feeling, but it lingers. There's something about this stranger that makes your skin crawl, a subtle arrogance behind their words, a forced humility in their smile. You want to believe it's just your imagination, but the discomfort grows. Then you realize they are exactly like you, not similar, identical. Every belief, every memory, every insecurity, their face, their voice, their habits, perfectly matched. And yet you feel nothing but unease. Why? You might think it's because they remind you of your flaws. But it's more than that. It's not just recognition, it's exposure. You see yourself without context, your mannerisms stripped of intent, your personality detached from your internal narrative. When you act, you tell yourself a story, that you're kind or thoughtful or strong. You understand your own contradictions. You justify them, excuse them. But when you see them in someone else, you lose that story. All that remains is the behavior, the words, the tone. Suddenly, everything you forgive in yourself becomes unbearable. You hear them explain something with too much certainty, and it sounds smug. You watch them try to be funny, and it feels rehearsed. They make a nervous joke, and you cringe, not because it's bad, but because it's exactly what you would have said. There's no room to hide, no distance, no excuse. You begin to wonder how others see you. If this is what they've always seen, if your confidence often sounds like arrogance, if your empathy sometimes looks like performance, you start to question how much of your personality is real and how much is just habit, shaped by what you hope others perceive. Maybe the reason you hate this stranger is because they remove the filter, the one you use to protect your self-image. They make you face the way you come across, not the way you feel. And that's terrifying. It's not about flaws anymore. It's about exposure. You're watching yourself from the outside, and suddenly nothing feels defensible. You thought you were self-aware, but now you see how fragile that awareness really is, how little control you have over the way you're interpreted. You start to notice every small behavior, every social tick, every way you fill silence with noise. You wonder if people like you, or if they're just being polite. And then the thought comes quietly. Maybe you don't like yourself. Not really. Maybe you've built your personality out of survival. Mannerisms that avoid rejection. Behaviors that invite approval. You've shaped yourself to be tolerated, not to be known. Seeing yourself in someone else, without the protective layers, makes that clear. It makes you realize how much of your identity is performance, how much of your kindness is strategy, how much of your confidence is defense. You start to imagine conversations you've had, the way you've interrupted, the way you've deflected compliments, the way you've pretended to listen, when you were really just waiting to speak. You think about every time you tried to sound interesting, and now wonder if you just sounded desperate. You try to imagine liking this stranger, but the harder you try, the more they repel you, because they aren't mysterious. They don't hold any surprises. You know every thought before they say it. You see the insecurity behind every word, the need for validation, the fear of silence. And that's the most unsettling part. You've spent so long trying to be understood. But when you're finally fully seen, even by yourself, it feels unbearable. Intimacy without mystery doesn't feel like closeness. It feels like exposure, and exposure feels like shame. You begin to grasp something deeper, that much of what you call identity is built on concealment. Small lies, curated impressions. You show people the parts of you that you can control, and you hide the rest. But this stranger, this version of you, hides nothing. They expose the whole pattern, the game behind the gestures, the logic behind the performance, and it makes you want to step away. Not because they're wrong, but because they're too right. You realize, with a quiet dread, that if this version of you existed in the world, you wouldn't want them close. You wouldn't trust them. You wouldn't admire them. You'd avoid them. Politely, subtly, but absolutely. And that realization doesn't fade. It lingers. It waits for you in every silent moment, whispering the same quiet thought. If you truly saw yourself, would you ever love what you found? How do you know you're telling the truth? Not to others, but to yourself. How do you know the story you're living is the real one, not just the one you've chosen to believe? There's a strange thing that happens the more intelligent you are. You think intelligence will protect you from lies, from distortion, from self-deception. But the opposite is often true. Intelligence doesn't guard you from delusion. It just helps you build better ones. A smart person can explain away anything. They can bend facts, rearrange memories, reinterpret motives, all without noticing they're doing it. Not because they're trying to lie, but because they're trying to feel okay. And the smarter they are, the more convincing the story becomes. They don't have to say it out loud. They just have to believe it long enough to stop questioning. You tell yourself you're doing your best, that your failures were unavoidable, that your anger was justified, that you didn't really want the thing you lost. You construct a version of events where you're reasonable, thoughtful, misunderstood, where your pain makes sense and your actions were the only option, and you believe it. Not because it's true, but because it protects you from guilt, from shame, from the terrifying thought that maybe you're not who you think you are. This isn't the loud kind of lying. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, subtle, a rearranging of emphasis, a softening of memory, a gentle erasure of contradiction. The smarter you are, the easier it is to make this seem like clarity, like wisdom. But it's not clarity, it's camouflage. You might notice it in the small things. The way you tell a story to others, leaving out the detail that makes you look bad. The way you remember a conflict, always making the other person more unreasonable than they were. The way you redefine your past choices as inevitable, even noble. And it feels harmless. You're not hurting anyone. You're just trying to understand. But each of these small revisions builds a version of your life that isn't quite real. And the longer you live in that version, the harder it is to find your way back to the truth. Eventually, you start defending things you don't even believe. You start acting out a role you didn't mean to play. You get angry when people challenge your version of events, not because they're wrong, but because their doubt threatens the illusion you need to survive. And here's the twist. The smarter you are, the more skilled you become at preserving that illusion. You develop arguments, justifications, rationalizations. You learn how to make your version of the truth feel inevitable, unshakable, even admirable. You don't just lie to yourself, you make the lie beautiful. You might even forget that you're doing it. Forget that there was a choice. Forget that another version of the story exists, one in which you were selfish or cruel or afraid. One in which the pain you caused wasn't accidental. One in which the thing that went wrong was your fault. But deep down, a part of you always knows that quiet part. The one that speaks in guilt, in dreams, in that sudden discomfort when someone sees through you. That part remembers the things you've buried. It knows what you're afraid to look at. And sometimes it tries to wake you up. A moment of doubt, a flash of memory, an unexpected silence that makes you feel suddenly exposed. But you push it away. You remind yourself of the version you've already accepted, the story where you're the one who was wronged, the one who tried, the one who meant well. You don't need to be a bad person to lie to yourself. You just need to be afraid. Afraid of facing something that hurts more than you think you can bear. That's all it takes. A single pain, hidden well enough, becomes the root of 1,000 lies. And you think the lie helps, that it keeps you safe, that it lets you function. But over time, the lie costs more than the truth ever would have. It isolates you. It calcifies you. It keeps you stuck in a version of yourself that can never really grow. Because when you lie to yourself, you don't just lose the truth, you lose the chance to become someone who can handle it. And maybe that's the most frightening thing of all, not that you've lied, but that you've become so good at it. You no longer know what the truth even was. Imagine the person in your life who always seems the most content, the one who smiles the widest, who makes others laugh, who radiates warmth in every room. Now ask yourself this: what if none of it is real? What if their happiness is a mask? Not a disguise in the playful sense, but a survival tactic, a shield against something unbearable, something they can't explain, something they don't want you to see. It's easy to believe happiness is evidence of a good life. We assume joy means safety, means love, means something is working. But sometimes happiness is the opposite. Sometimes it's a performance, a form of control, a way to keep others from looking too closely. Because once someone notices you're not okay, things change. People start asking questions. They offer help you don't want. They watch you more closely, even pity you. And pity is unbearable when you're already drowning. So instead, you smile, you tell jokes, you talk about how grateful you are. You overcompensate, because anything is better than being seen as fragile. This isn't lying in the usual sense. It's not manipulation. It's defense. For some people, pretending to be okay is the only way they can make it through the day without collapsing, and they get good at it. So good that even they start to believe it sometimes, until they're alone, until the mask falls off and the silence comes. You might be thinking, but why wouldn't they just tell someone? Because telling the truth doesn't always help. Sometimes it makes things worse. Sometimes it opens wounds that don't heal. Sometimes it means facing the depth of what you feel, and that kind of honesty can be more dangerous than pretending. There are people who laugh all day and cry in the dark. People who lift others up while quietly falling apart. Not because they want to suffer, but because they've learned that vulnerability isn't always safe. That when they've been honest before, it's backfired. They've been judged, abandoned, dismissed. So they build something others won't question. A version of themselves that's bright enough to hide the shadows. And here's the deeper tension. They might not even know they're doing it anymore. Over time, the mask fuses with the face. The performance becomes the personality, until the real self, the scared, hurt, overwhelmed part, gets buried so deep, it barely feels real anymore. Sometimes they even feel guilty for struggling. They compare their pain to others and decide it's not valid. They shame themselves for being sad when things aren't that bad. So they double down. They push the pain away. They smile harder. But the cost of this kind of survival is steep. You become invisible in plain sight. People love the version of you you've created, but not the real you. And that loneliness is devastating. It's not being alone in the room. It's being surrounded by people and knowing not a single one of them truly sees you. You might think this is rare, that most people are what they seem. But what if it's more common than you think? What if the happiest person in your life, the one who always seems strong, always seems put together, is the one carrying the heaviest weight? And what if you've never asked, never looked closer? Because it's easier to believe they're fine. Now think about yourself. Are there things you don't let people see? Parts of you that stay hidden, even from those closest to you? Maybe you've smiled through grief. Maybe you've cracked jokes to avoid crying. Maybe you've said, "I'm okay," so many times you forgot what it feels like not to be. This isn't about being fake. It's about being afraid. Afraid of burdening others. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of admitting that you're not as strong as you want to be. And so you perform. You become the version of yourself that feels safest, most acceptable, least threatening. But here's the unsettling part. When everyone performs, when everyone is pretending to some degree, who's left to tell the truth? How do we know who's actually okay and who's barely holding on? The world becomes a stage of silent suffering, each person applauding the next, convinced they're the only one faking it. And over time the pressure builds, because if you're the happy one, the strong one, the dependable one, you're not allowed to fall apart. You're not allowed to need help. You're not allowed to stop pretending. Because you're the example, the proof that things can be okay, so you keep going. Even when you want to stop, even when you're tired, even when you're scared, you keep performing because stopping feels like failure, like weakness, like exposure. And maybe the darkest truth is this: some people get so good at pretending to be okay that no one ever knows they weren't. Not until it's too late. Not until the mask breaks. Not until the silence becomes permanent. So the next time someone seems unshakably happy, unbreakably positive, pause, look a little closer. Ask twice, not because everyone is secretly miserable, but because sometimes the people who laugh the loudest are the ones trying hardest not to scream. What if you could see them all? Every life you didn't live. Every version of you that never happened. Every path you almost took, but didn't. They're not dreams. They're not metaphors. They are real enough to mourn, even though they never touched the world. Each time you make a choice, you kill them. Not by accident, not by neglect, but by selection. When you chose to study one subject, you ended the version of you who would have studied something else. When you said yes to one person, you said no to every life you could have had with anyone else. When you moved to a new city, you buried the version of yourself who stayed. The silence of those unlived lives is deafening. If you stop and listen. We don't like to think this way. We tell ourselves we're choosing growth, progress, direction. But the truth is, every choice is also a small act of violence, not toward others, toward possibility, toward the infinite selves that will now never exist. This isn't a problem you can solve. It's not about regret or making better decisions. It's not even about making the right one. It's about what you destroy just by deciding. Because the moment you choose anything at all, you are severing the entire branch of reality where you chose differently. And unlike mistakes, these aren't errors you can undo. You can't go back and try again. You can't resurrect a version of yourself that never got the chance to be born. Once a path is closed, it is gone forever. And you carry the weight of that loss, even if you never feel it directly. Sometimes it hides as restlessness, sometimes as longing. Sometimes you call it boredom, or anxiety, or nostalgia. But beneath all of it is grief, quiet, persistent grief for the people you might have been, the ones who didn't get picked, the lives you sentenced to non-existence. You might think the alternative is worse, never choosing, always drifting, paralyzed by possibility. But indecision is a choice too. It kills the versions of you who would have acted. It leaves only the ones who waited too long, who watched their possibilities dissolve in slow motion. so you can't escape it. Not by choosing, not by waiting, not by pretending your decisions don't matter. They always matter, and they always come with a cost. You may want to believe that each choice brings you closer to who you really are, that every decision is a step toward becoming your true self. But if that were true, what does it mean that your true self depends entirely on what you eliminate? What does it say about you? If everything you are is built from what you are not, you can never know what those other lives would have held. Some of them might have led to failure, suffering, loneliness. But others could have brought love you'll never feel, work you'll never do, joy you'll never understand, you will never know. And this is where it gets harder, because you are the one doing it. No one else is responsible. No accident or external force is to blame. You are the one who made the choice. You are the one who killed those lives, and you will do it again. Today, tomorrow, for the rest of your life. Each time you say yes, you erase every no. Each time you say no, you erase every yes. And somewhere inside you, those erasures stay. They don't haunt you like ghosts. They don't speak or scream or beg to be remembered. That they're just there, like something you lost and forgot you were looking for. And maybe that's the worst part. Not that you made the wrong choice, not that you missed something better, but that you'll never know what you killed. Never get to meet the versions of yourself that might have made sense in a way you never will. Never hear their thoughts or feel their lives from the inside. And if you're honest, really honest, you can feel how fragile this version of you actually is. How close it came to not existing at all. How thin the line is between who you are and who you almost became. And that's what you live with. Not the burden of one decision, but the quiet extinction of all the others. Not the regret of what you did, but the absence of what you didn't. Because every choice you make kills the life you didn't choose. And the version of you hearing this now only exists because all the others were destroyed. Every time you remember something, your brain changes it. That isn't metaphor. That's biological fact. The moment a memory is retrieved, it becomes unstable, pliable, fragile, vulnerable to distortion. Then your brain stores it again, slightly altered, sometimes subtly, sometimes completely. The next time you recall it, you're not remembering the original moment. You're remembering your last memory of it. A copy of a copy. And with every repetition, the original slips further away. This happens automatically, without your permission, without your awareness. You trust your memories because they feel vivid, emotional, personal. But feeling something deeply doesn't make it real. It just means your brain has committed to the version it created. And if that version is wrong, you won't know. You can't know. Because the memory itself is the only evidence you have. Think of someone you once loved, someone you lost. Try to picture their face exactly. The shape of their mouth, the sound of their voice, the way they made you feel. Now ask yourself, how much of that is real? How much is reconstruction? If a photo contradicts your memory, which do you trust? If another person remembers it differently, do you feel doubt or defensiveness? Memory isn't a recording. It's a story your mind tells you, shaped by who you are now, not who you were then. If your current self is angry, the memory becomes sharper, crueler. If you feel lonely, the past seems warmer. If you're afraid, the memory bends toward comfort. And each time you remember it, your brain edits, reprocesses, rewrites, not because it wants to lie, but because that's how memory works. And slowly, imperceptibly, your past changes. Not just in feeling, but in fact. People you once blamed become sympathetic. Kindness you received becomes invisible. Pain you caused becomes justified. Over time, your memories serve a new purpose, protecting the version of yourself you need to believe in. And here's where it gets worse. You don't just forget what happened. You forget that you forgot. The moment your memory shifts, the new version feels real as the original. There's no signal that it's been altered, no discomfort, no warning. You move through life believing in a continuity that doesn't exist. Decisions you think you made for one reason may have been for another. Traumas you carry might be exaggerated or minimized or entirely reconstructed. You might be angry at someone for something they never did, or you might have forgiven someone for something far worse than you remember. And you'll never know, because there's no backup, no objective record, just the version your brain made, shaped by emotion, bias, context, and then quietly locked into place. So what does that mean for who you are? If your memories define your identity, but your memories are false, or at least unreliable, then what's left? What anchors your sense of self? Are you just the current arrangement of stories your brain happens to believe today? And if you change those stories intentionally or not, would you become someone else? Now think about the moments that shaped you, the betrayals, the triumphs, the lessons. How many of them have been edited over the years? How many would shock you if you saw them as they really happened? Would your pain make less sense? Would your pride collapse? Would your guilt deepen? What if a single repressed moment, buried or rewritten by your brain, is the reason you feel the way you do right now? Not because it happened, but because of how your mind chose to remember it. And now, here's the most unsettling part. Your future self will not remember today as it truly is. Even this moment, your thoughts right now will be revised, softened, hardened, recontextualized. You might look back on it someday and feel something different. You'll believe that new feeling, you'll trust it completely, and you'll be wrong because memory isn't truth, it's maintenance. And your brain will lie to you as many times as it needs to, not to hurt you, but to hold you together, to keep the illusion of a stable identity intact, even if it means erasing who you really were. He was just an old man in a lab coat. You didn't know his name. You were told he was a doctor. That was enough. The man running the experiment told you to ask him questions, then give him small electric shocks when he answered incorrectly. Not dangerous, he said. Just part of the study. You hesitated. He reassured you. The other researchers nodded. You believed them. The first shock made the man flinch. The next one made him groan. He begged you to stop by the fourth. You looked around. No one else seemed concerned. The man beside you, calm official with a clipboard, just told you to keep going. The experiment requires that you continue, he said. And so you did, even when the man screamed, even when he pounded on the wall, even when he fell silent. You kept pressing the button because someone told you to. The room wasn't violent. There was no yelling, no threat, no punishment for stopping. Only a quiet voice beside you, reminding you that this was for science, for understanding, for progress. You weren't a bad person. You didn't want to hurt anyone. But somehow, that didn't matter. All it took was the appearance of authority, a lab coat, a clipboard, a soft command, and you obeyed. You don't want to believe you could be like that. You imagine yourself as strong, principled, someone who would refuse. But the data is against you. Most people don't refuse. They continue. Even when it's clear the person is in pain, even when their own hands are shaking, even when they want to stop, they just need someone nearby to keep telling them it's okay, and it is, until it isn't. What does that say about morality? If your actions can be changed so easily, not by threat or desperation, but by a simple instruction, what does that mean for guilt, for responsibility? If you only hurt someone because you were told to, does that make it better or worse? Worse, maybe, because you're not a monster. You're not cruel, and yet you did it anyway. That means the boundary between cruelty and obedience isn't as clear as you thought. It means your kindness, your conscience, your sense of right and wrong, they're not fixed, they're conditional, malleable, vulnerable. And if that's true, then what are you? You want to believe that evil is committed by evil people, that harm comes from hatred. But the truth is more ordinary. It comes from silence, from compliance. From people like you who want to be good, who want to do the right thing, but only as long as someone else tells them they can stop. Now imagine someone told you to do worse, not a shock, a slap, a knife, a gun. How far would you go if the voice beside you kept saying it was necessary? How many small steps would you take before realizing you crossed a line that no longer exists? And if it were you on the receiving end, pleading, screaming, begging for it to stop, what would you want the person holding the button to do? Would you hope they listen to their conscience? Or would you know, deep down, that they probably won't? Because you understand now, don't you? The horror isn't just that you could be made to hurt someone. It's how easily you might do it, how little it takes, how small the push has to be, and how quickly you'd try to forget. Would you ever hurt someone, just to feel like you matter, not for revenge, not for justice, just to feel less powerless, less small, less irrelevant? It happens more often than you think, quietly, subtly, without warning. A tone of voice, a withheld apology, a joke that cuts too deeply. At first, it doesn't even look like cruelty. It looks like control, because when you feel helpless, when nothing in your life bends to your will, there's a strange relief in knowing that someone else will flinch when you speak, that someone else is reacting to you, adjusting for you, feeling the impact of your presence. Control doesn't always come from strength. Sometimes it's born from fear, the fear that you don't matter unless someone else is bending under your weight. And so you push, not to destroy, but to feel real. You criticize someone who can't defend themselves. You interrupt. You correct. You say no, not because you believe it, but because you can. And the moment they hesitate, the moment they defer, something inside you calms, just a little. Just enough to get through the day. You might not even know you're doing it. You might call it honesty, or boundaries, or leadership. But beneath the surface, it's about control, not power over the world, but over the discomfort inside you. Because when everything feels out of your hands, your job, your relationships, your body, your future, the quickest fix is to tighten your grip on someone weaker, someone quieter, someone who won't push back, and it works. Briefly, the silence that follows feels like victory, like order, like peace. But it fades, and the emptiness returns. So you do it again. A little harsher this time, a little colder, just to make sure the world hasn't forgotten you. But every time you hurt someone, just to feel in control, a part of you knows, a quiet, hidden part. The part that watches you from the inside and sees exactly what you're doing. It doesn't speak, it doesn't shame. It just remembers every moment, every small cruelty, every decision to assert your will instead of facing your fear. And you start to feel it in ways you can't name, in the tension in your shoulders, the guilt that won't fully form. The people who slowly distance themselves without saying why. You tell yourself they're too sensitive, too weak, but deep down, you know what you've become. You don't need to be strong to cause harm. You just need to be afraid. And once that fear finds a target, it will disguise itself as control. It will convince you that you're simply protecting yourself, that you're setting boundaries, that you're doing what needs to be done. But the truth is quieter and much harder to face. You hurt them because you could, because you needed to believe you were still capable of shaping something. Even if all you could shape was someone else's pain. and eventually it becomes a pattern, a coping mechanism, a way to survive the unbearable feeling that nothing in your life truly belongs to you. The control starts small, a correction here, a dismissal there, but slowly it grows. You start choosing people not based on love or connection, but on how easily they can be influenced, how easily they can be controlled, and you surround yourself with silence, with compliance, with the illusion of power. But power built on fear is always unstable. One moment of resistance, one act of defiance, and it shatters, and you feel it again, that helplessness, that smallness, that ache you thought you'd buried. And now you're left with a question you've been avoiding. If you can only feel in control by making someone else feel worse, what happens when there's no one left to hurt? What happens when you're finally alone with yourself, and you realize that the control you chased never made you feel safe? It only distracted you from how afraid you already were. And maybe that's the most painful truth of all. Not that people will hurt others to feel in control, but that they never stop hurting themselves in the process. What if someone is watching you right now, not to admire you, not to harm you, but to judge you, not for what you've done, but for what you might do? They aren't here to test themselves. They're here to test you. You wouldn't know it. That's part of the test. Maybe it's someone close, a friend, a sibling, a partner, or maybe it's someone quiet in the background, unnoticed. You've had hundreds of conversations you've forgotten. They've remembered every word, not because of what you said, but because of what it revealed. They're studying your limits, waiting for a moment when they need to decide something difficult, and using you as the answer. What kind of person is she? Would he protect a stranger? Would they lie to avoid pain? Could they hurt someone if pushed far enough? Not abstract questions, real ones, with consequences. You might have already given them their answer. When you laughed at something cruel, when you stayed silent in the face of suffering, when you showed kindness that cost you nothing, or withheld it when it might have meant something. The truth is, everyone becomes someone else's moral test. Eventually, you're someone's data point, a control variable. A what would they do in a moment of tension they replay in their head long after you've forgotten it happened. You don't get to choose what moment that is. You don't get to decide what it meant to them. You might have been joking, you might have been tired, but they were paying attention. Sometimes people are standing on the edge of a decision, a hard one, and they look to you, not for advice, but for evidence. They're thinking about whether they can forgive someone, whether to report something, whether to confront a lie, and they remember you. What you said, what you didn't, who you protected, who you betrayed, how you handled fear, how you treated weakness, how you spoke when no one was watching. And in that moment, your behavior becomes a reason, a model, a justification, or a warning. You might not like that. It might feel unfair. But think of all the times you've done the same, all the times you've said, if even he did it, then I guess it's not so bad. Or, I know she would never do that, so maybe I'm wrong. That's what we do. We measure ourselves against others, not against strangers, but against people we know, people we trust to be normal, people we use to calibrate our sense of right and wrong. But normal isn't neutral, it's contagious. So what if someone is about to do something irreversible, something they'll carry forever, and your past behavior is the tipping point? You didn't ask for that power, you didn't know you had it, but they've assigned it to you, quietly, completely. They remember you defending someone when it wasn't popular. They remember you being cruel just to fit in. They remember you saying that's just how it is. And now they're using that memory to decide whether to be better or worse than the person they believe you are. You think you're living your life, making your choices. following your own values. But all the while, someone else is testing theirs against you, silently, carefully, because they don't trust themselves yet, because they need a reference point, because they need to know what someone good would do. But you're not a reference point. You're just a person, flawed, inconsistent, sometimes brave, sometimes selfish. And yet, without your consent, you've become their test. Maybe they're still deciding. Maybe right now they're thinking about whether to speak up, to walk away, to take responsibility. And they're thinking about you. What would you do? What did you do? You'll never know what choice they make. You'll never know what role you played. But it's already happening. You've already been chosen. Someone else's morality is shaped in part by yours. And that should terrify you. Not because you might fail their test, but because you never even knew it was happening. Would you still save the baby if you knew what they would become? Not just someone troubled, not someone who struggles or fails, but someone who one day will kill thousands, burn a city to the ground, tear apart families, lives, futures, and it all begins because you reached out your hand, because you pulled them from danger, because you believed saving them was the right thing to do. You didn't know it at the time. Of course you didn't. You saw a child, fragile, innocent, crying out in a moment of fear. And in that moment, your instincts took over. You protected them. You gave them a chance, a future, a life. And now that life has grown into something else, something monstrous, something that will leave you staring at news reports, footage of the aftermath, body counts rising, knowing you were the reason they lived long enough to do it. You start to question everything. Was it still the right choice? Wouldn't any decent person have done what you did? Does it matter that you couldn't have predicted it, that you had no way of knowing? Does ignorance absolve responsibility? But what if you weren't completely ignorant? What if there was a small doubt, a tiny voice in the back of your mind that said something wasn't right, something broken, something dangerous just beneath the surface? What if you felt it, but ignored it, because acknowledging it would have made you hesitate, because it was easier to believe in redemption than in risk? And now you wonder, is your guilt just survivor's guilt in reverse? Is it the guilt of a savior who accidentally created the very thing they thought they were saving the world from? You replay the moment in your mind again and again. The rescue, the gratitude, the child looking up at you. And you start to wonder who else saw it. Who else would hold you responsible if they knew, if they connected the dots, if they traced the horror all the way back to the moment you thought you were doing good? You try to defend yourself. You tell yourself that no one can see the future, that saving a life is never wrong. But you hesitate now, that certainty you once had. It's thinner. It shakes when you speak it aloud, because something inside you knows that morality isn't about absolutes. It's about consequences, about what happens next. You start to feel it like a weight, a quiet, invisible pressure, not enough to break you, but enough to change you. Every time you hear about what they've done, you feel it again, like a whisper in your chest. You did this. You made this possible. You begin to wonder what kind of person that makes you. Someone who saves lives without considering what those lives might become. Someone who believes too blindly in the value of life itself, without asking what it will cost others. You tell yourself you couldn't have done anything differently. But that doesn't help, because now you have to live with what they became, and you can't undo it. You can't go back and choose not to save them. You can only sit with the knowledge that your kindness helped create something terrible. And then it gets worse, because you realize the opposite is also true. That every time you choose not to act, every time you let someone die or suffer or fall, that too could be a mistake. That maybe the one you let slip away would have changed the world for the better. That maybe your hesitation cost the world a healer, a leader, a savior. So now you're stuck, not knowing who to save, who to abandon, who to risk. Every choice becomes a coin flip, with consequences you'll never see until it's too late. And you start to see the cruelty in it, the absurdity, that the very act of trying to do good, of trying to save anyone, might lead to something worse than doing nothing at all. So what do you do now? Do you stop saving people, afraid of what they might become? Do you hesitate, calculate, second guess every instinct you have? Or do you keep saving them, knowing full well that some of them will become monsters? Because the truth is, you won't ever know. Not until it's too late. And that's the weight you carry now. Not just the memory of the one you saved, but the silence of all the futures you can never predict. And the unbearable truth that sometimes kindness is the thing that lets the fire spread. Why does a child trust a clown more than a clear explanation, a painted face, a silly voice, exaggerated movements, and a child feels safe? But when you tell them, calmly, reasonably, that a stove is hot or that a stranger is dangerous, they hesitate. They need to see for themselves. Children aren't born with a grasp of logic. They learn it slowly, and even then, not instinctively, what they respond to first. What shapes their earliest trust is presence, expression, tone, emotion. A clown is exaggerated safety, loud comfort, predictable joy. Even when it's absurd, even when it doesn't make sense, it feels familiar. It signals safe in a way that bypasses thought. The logic of the brain is slower than the logic of the body, and the body reads cues, smiles, color, play. So the child trusts the clown more quickly, more easily, not because it makes sense, but because it feels right. And this doesn't change when we grow up. We tell ourselves we're rational, that we make decisions based on evidence, argument, reason. But beneath that surface, we still respond first to tone, to comfort, to the familiar rhythm of confidence. That's why people believe liars who sound certain, why they follow leaders who entertain them, why they ignore quiet warnings, even when those warnings are correct. We trust the clown, even as adults, not the literal clown, but the idea of one, the person who plays to our instincts, who tells us what we want to hear in a way that feels right. We don't ask for proof, we ask for presence. And the people who speak plainly, without performance, who rely on reason, not rhythm, they're ignored, dismissed. Not because they're wrong, but because they aren't playing the game, they aren't wearing the mask. It's not just children who choose the clown, it's you. It's everyone. You hear a charismatic voice, and it feels like truth. You see a warm smile, and it feels like safety. You feel understood, and that's enough to call it real. But it isn't real. It's choreography. Then the more skilled someone is at performing warmth, the more easily they are believed. This is how con artists survive, how propaganda spreads, how falsehood becomes collective belief. Not through facts, but through feeling, through repetition, through a comforting cadence that mimics certainty. It's why people cling to obvious lies, not because they don't know better, but because the lie feels better than the truth. And once something feels true, the mind bends to protect it. Logic is twisted, discarded, weaponized, not to discover truth, but to defend the feeling. You might think you're immune to this, that you'd never fall for it, that you'd see through the performance. But what if you already have? What if some of the things you believe right now, things that feel completely real, were just well-delivered illusions. Would you know the difference? How many of your opinions come from emotion first, justification second? How many things do you know simply because they feel familiar, comforting, or expected? And if you had to strip away every belief that didn't come from pure reason, how much would be left? The truth is, logic feels slow, it feels uncertain, it questions itself, it wavers, but confidence, even false confidence, feels immediate. It wraps around you like safety. So we follow the clown, we laugh, we trust, we listen more closely, even when part of us knows better. And when the clown leads us somewhere dangerous, we struggle to break away, not because we're fooled, but because we're comforted. This is the danger. Not that children trust clowns, but that we never stop. We just start calling the clowns other names. We call them influencers, experts, leaders, friends, and we trust them, not for their ideas, but for their delivery. We trust what makes us feel seen, what gives us peace, what performs certainty, even when it's wrong, even when it harms us, even when the quiet voice of reason is whispering in the background, asking us to listen, but we don't, because the clown is louder and smiles wider, and we are tired, so tired of thinking. So we follow the face that doesn't ask us to. What if you never loved them? What if every moment you thought was love, every obsession, every ache, every desperate need wasn't something pure or profound, but just a surge of chemicals? What if the feeling you clung to, the one you built your identity around, was biologically identical to compulsion, dopamine, norepinephrine, oxytocin? These are the names of the molecules that flood your brain when you're in love. These are the same chemicals released during addiction, the same ones that fuel obsession. Your heart races. Your thoughts loop endlessly. You replay words, gestures, glances, unable to stop. The intensity feels like meaning. It feels like fate, but it's just chemistry. It has no moral weight, no spiritual depth, no truth beyond biology. Think back to someone you once swore you couldn't live without. Someone who made your stomach twist and your skin tighten just by entering a room. Someone who made you feel alive. Where are they now? What do you feel when you think of them? The chemicals faded, the urgency died, but in the moment, it felt eternal. In the moment, you were certain. Now consider this. What if the same neural patterns light up when you fixate on someone in a way that isn't mutual? When the bond is one-sided, obsessive, unreciprocated? The brain doesn't know the difference. It responds the same way. The highs, the crashes, the withdrawal. What you call heartbreak is, in chemical terms, a form of withdrawal. Your body craving the rush it lost. This isn't metaphor. It's not a poetic comparison. It's measurable, observable. The brain of someone in love and the brain of someone addicted look almost identical in a scan. The same areas activated, the same neurotransmitters surging. And yet, one is romanticized, the other is pathologized. So where is the line between love and obsession? Is it in your intentions, your behavior, your ability to let go? Or is the line simply cultural, drawn not by the brain, but by what we're told is acceptable? When someone checks their phone every 5 minutes, waits desperately for a message, fantasizes endlessly about someone who barely acknowledges them, do we call it love, or do we call it fixation? When someone needs another person to feel whole, is that connection or dependency? Imagine someone follows every move you make, reads into every word, builds their life around your presence. If they're a stranger, it's terrifying. If they're a partner, it's passion. The difference isn't in the brain, it's in the context, the permission, the illusion of mutuality. And what about the early stages of love, when you're not sleeping, not eating, when your thoughts feel hijacked. We call it infatuation. But neurologically, it's a manic state. It matches the profile of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Intrusive thoughts, emotional volatility, loss of control, and yet we welcome it, chase it, miss it when it's gone. Why? Because it makes us feel needed, because it feels like meaning, because we've learned to confuse intensity with truth. But here's the part you don't want to hear. There's no chemical test for sincerity. The brain doesn't distinguish between a bond that's healthy and one that's toxic, between someone who nourishes you and someone who destroys you. If they trigger the right responses, they can feel the same. The high is the same. The craving is the same. The crash is the same. So how do you know the difference? How do you know if the love you feel is real or just familiar pathways being triggered again and again? How do you know if the person you're drawn to is someone you actually care for or someone who just fits your pattern, someone whose attention activates your chemistry, regardless of who they really are? It's possible to mistake emotional intensity for emotional truth, to believe you're in love when you're actually just chasing relief from loneliness or fear or shame. It's possible to become addicted to someone who hurts you because pain can trigger the same chemical loops as pleasure, because the brain only wants stimulation. It doesn't care about the consequences. So what does that make you? If everything you called love was driven by these same patterns, if the memories you treasure were just chemical highs, if your most meaningful moments were neurologically indistinguishable from obsession, does that cheapen them? Or does it reveal something deeper? Maybe love isn't what you thought it was. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was always just a brain chasing balance, searching for stability through instability, a body trying to regulate its own chemistry using someone else. And maybe the most disturbing part isn't that love and obsession are chemically identical. Maybe it's that you've always known and kept calling it love anyway. Your reflection delays by milliseconds and you don't notice. But what if you did? What if one day something small felt wrong? Not wrong like danger. Wrong like a breath that arrives too late. Like blinking and feeling your eyelids stay closed just a moment longer than they should. You look in the mirror and everything seems fine. Your face, your eyes, your mouth. But there's a flicker. Almost nothing. Almost. You smile, then you wonder. Did it happen first on your face or in the mirror? Milliseconds, that's all it takes. Too fast to see, too small to measure without tools, but enough to shift something inside you, because the mirror is supposed to follow you. Instantly, perfectly. A mirror doesn't wait, it doesn't lag, it doesn't think, it reacts. So if it ever doesn't, if even once it hesitates, what are you looking at? Most of the time, you wouldn't know. The delay is so short, it never reaches consciousness. But your brain still sees it. Deep down, beneath attention, it notices the gap, and it fills it in. Smooths it over. Lies to you. Just like it always does. You move your hand, you speak a word, you frown, and your reflection follows. But what if it didn't? Not obviously, not in a way anyone else would notice. Just slightly off, a little too slow, or maybe a little too fast. And once you've seen it, even once you can't forget. Now every glance becomes a question. Every mirror an experiment. Did your lips move at the same time? Did your eye twitch too early? Was that your head turning, or just the memory of it? You try to catch it, but you never can, not fully. It's like chasing your own shadow. The more you focus, the more perfectly it mimics you. But when you forget, when you relax, it slips. And in those moments, something breaks. Because a reflection is supposed to be you. It's supposed to be you from the outside. A perfect copy, frozen in glass. But if it moves before you do, if it knows what you'll do before you've done it, then what is it really? Maybe it's just a trick of the mind, but delay in perception, a visual hiccup. But even if that's true, the damage is already done. You've opened a crack, you've invited doubt. Now you wonder, which side of the mirror are you on? It sounds absurd, delusional, but the question stays. You walk past windows and check for a flicker. You catch your silhouette in car mirrors, in store displays, in screens, and you wonder, is that me or just the version of me that the world sees? And what if that version is slightly ahead? You raise your arm, it follows, but is it following or is it leading? Is it predicting you? Is it showing what you were always going to do before you chose to do it? You start to notice other things, small things. Your voice in recordings feels unfamiliar. Your face in photos looks wrong. You hear yourself laugh and flinch. Is that how others hear you? Is that who they think you are? And slowly, the idea takes hold. Maybe your reflection isn't a delay at all. Maybe it's the original. Maybe what you think is real is just the echo. The reflection smiles, and you follow. It furrows its brow, and you feel concern. It blinks, and you blink. Milliseconds. That's all it takes. Less than a thought. Less than a doubt. But enough, because if your reflection is slightly ahead, then it knows you. It knows what you will do before you do. It anticipates. It watches. It prepares. And if it knows you that well, how different is it? Really? Or worse? How separate? You look into the mirror and see yourself. You blink. You breathe. You smile. But for the first time, you don't feel seen. You feel observed. And maybe that's the truth you were never meant to know. That you are not entirely alone in your body. That a part of you watches from outside, tracks every motion, waits for every command. And that sometimes, just sometimes, it acts before you do. You stare longer, harder, waiting for it to slip, to move out of sync, to prove it's not you, but it never does. Not when you're looking, so you turn away. And in that instant, when your back is turned, when your attention breaks, you know it happens again. A blink, a smile, a twitch, before you. And now you can't stop thinking about it. You can't walk past glass without checking. You can't look into your eyes without wondering who's doing the looking. You start to feel as though you're not in charge of your own face, as though something is acting through you, as though you are the reflection. And maybe the worst part isn't the delay. It's that you never noticed before. Would you feel more guilt pulling a lever than pushing a man? You're standing on a bridge. A train is coming. Below, 5 people are tied to the tracks. A lever next to you controls a switch. Pull it, and the train diverts onto another track where a single person is tied down. 1 life to save 5. The math is easy. The choice is not. Now change it. There's no lever, just a large man standing beside you. If you push him, his body will stop the train, saving the 5. You know this. Nothing else changes. Same outcomes, same numbers, same lives. But your hesitation grows. Your body stiffens. You feel it already. Something's different now. Logically, it's identical. 1 dies, 5 live. But emotionally, viscerally, the second choice is heavier. Why? Because pulling a lever feels distant, mechanical, abstract. You move a handle. You watch events unfold. You never touch the person who dies, but pushing someone, that's your hand on their back, your force, your movement. Their death is yours in a way. The lever never made it. It's not about logic. It's about proximity. This is the quiet truth most people never admit. Morality isn't about outcomes. It's about what we can live with. You could pull a lever and tell yourself you saved more people. But could you push someone? Feel their body move under your hands, and tell yourself the same thing. What if the person you're asked to kill is looking you in the eye? What if they beg? What if they trust you? Can your reasoning survive the weight of their humanity? This isn't just about action, it's about emotional distance. We make brutal choices all the time, choices that let people suffer, die, vanish into systems we don't think about. But we do it indirectly, passively. We vote, we consume, we obey, and we tell ourselves we're good because we never had to push. The closer you are to the harm, the more unbearable it feels. Even if the harm is smaller, that's the contradiction. The closer you get to the face of the person who suffers, the less able you are to treat them as a number. In morality, when it matters most, isn't abstract. It's not about totals. It's about the weight of proximity. You'd rather watch 5 die than push one to save them. And you don't know why. You want to believe it's principle, that it's about respecting autonomy, refusing to use people as tools. But if that were true, you wouldn't pull the lever either. You wouldn't make the decision at all. Yet many people do pull the lever. They act, but only at a distance. And maybe that's the real dividing line, not between good and evil, but between action and closeness, between decisions made with clean hands and those made with blood on them. You want to see yourself as moral, but you also want to stay clean. And when those two needs collide, something inside you starts to fracture. You could save more lives, but only if you're willing to stain yourself permanently. Now consider this. If the man you have to push is your friend, your partner, your child, does the answer change again? Does morality shift with relationship, with emotion, with memory? If so, are your values real, or are they just costumes you wear until they become too uncomfortable? Most people don't want to face what this reveals, that our sense of right and wrong is shaped less by reason and more by emotional thresholds, that what we call moral reasoning might just be emotional avoidance. You won't push the man, not because it's wrong, but because you can't stand what it would do to you. And yet, if you walked away, 5 people would die. You'd live. The man beside you would live. But you'd carry the knowledge that you let others die to preserve your comfort. Your silence would be loud. Your stillness would echo. So which is worse? Is it more moral to act and feel guilt for what you've done, or to abstain and feel guilt for what you allowed? You're looking for an answer. A clean one, a justifiable one, but none exists. That's what this scenario exposes. Not a question of ethics, but a mirror, a way to see what lines you won't cross, not because they're wrong, but because they're unbearable. You don't fear guilt. You fear guilt with no justification. You fear acting, and then having to live with what that action says about you. Because pushing a man is not about saving 5 lives. It's about who you become when you choose to. And maybe that's the most unsettling truth, that the value of a life changes not by who it is or how many are saved, but by how close you have to stand when it ends. What if you're dreaming right now, not in the abstract way people joke about, not metaphorically, literally? What if everything you're seeing, hearing, and feeling at this moment, this exact second, is just part of a dream you haven't yet realized you're having? You might dismiss the thought quickly. You know you're awake, you can feel your body, recall your morning, trace a clear line from yesterday to today. But then you remember, in your dreams, you're usually just as certain. Dream logic makes sense until it doesn't. You accept impossibilities without question. You remember fake memories as if they're real. You believe what the dream presents to you because you don't realize you're dreaming until you wake up. But here's the thing. You've never woken up from reality, not once. Which means you've never had a moment where you confirmed, without doubt, that this isn't a dream. So how do you know? You try to test it. You look around, focus on details. But dreams often mimic that too. They can feel detailed, coherent, emotionally grounded. Sometimes they're even more vivid than waking life. And when they break, it's never because you proved anything. It's because something strange slipped through, something your mind couldn't justify. You think of lucid dreamers, people who wake up inside their dreams and take control. But even they, at times, can't be sure they're dreaming. The dream adapts, it corrects itself. It gives explanations for inconsistencies, smoothing over the cracks, just like life often does. You believe in physical laws, cause and effect, continuity. But every single one of those could be simulated. In a detailed enough dream, pain feels real. Time feels linear. Conversations make sense. You feel fear, joy, regret. Everything you'd expect to feel while awake. So what makes waking life different? Some say it's consistency. The world doesn't randomly shift or dissolve, but you only think that because today feels like yesterday. If this were a dream, it might have started 10 seconds ago, with your entire memory fabricated to match. You wouldn't know, you wouldn't feel it, because dreams don't usually tell you they've begun. You might argue that dreams are unstable, surreal, but most dreams aren't like that. Many are ordinary, mundane. You've likely had dreams where you went to work, had a conversation, sat in a room just like this one. Entire dream sequences built around quiet, normal experiences. You woke up thinking it was boring, uneventful, until you realized it never happened. So maybe the strangeness isn't that dreams can seem real. Maybe the real horror is that reality can seem dreamlike, and you wouldn't know the difference. You try to grasp something solid, the weight of your body, the sound of your voice, the memory of a hard truth. But all of these things can be mimicked in dreams, and your belief in them doesn't prove anything. It just means the dream is convincing enough to trick you. Now the thought sinks deeper. If you can't prove this isn't a dream, what else can't you prove? Can you trust your past, your relationships, the values that feel foundational to who you are? What if your entire sense of self is just part of the illusion, built to give structure to a world that doesn't actually exist? You want to believe there would be clues, that something would feel off. But people often dream about questioning reality. People dream about waking up from dreams. And sometimes, even then, they're still dreaming. You've probably had moments in waking life where everything felt too strange, too fragile, too distant. Moments where you questioned yourself, your surroundings, your emotions. Maybe you chalked it up to exhaustion, anxiety, or déjà vu. But what if that was the dream trying to break? What if those were the cracks? And if this is a dream, then where are you really? Are you asleep in a bed somewhere? Comatose in a hospital? A brain in a jar? Something else entirely? Or maybe you don't exist at all. Maybe this version of you, the one asking these questions, is just a character in someone else's dream. A placeholder. A voice that disappears the moment they wake up. The unsettling part isn't that you might be dreaming. It's that you'd have no way to tell. And if you've never truly woken up, then maybe you never will. What if the person suffering is someone you've never met, someone you'll never meet, someone far away in a place you've never been, speaking a language you don't understand? Does it feel the same? It's strange how morality fades with distance. Not just physical distance, but emotional, cultural, psychological. The further the victim is from your world, the less real their suffering feels. You don't cry for them the way you cry for your friend. You don't lose sleep. You don't feel urgency. Their pain exists, you know that. It's just that it feels dimmer, fainter. Easier to ignore. You wouldn't walk past someone drowning in front of you. But you scroll past headlines of mass starvation, civil war, industrial slavery, genocide. You feel something, but only faintly. Then you move on. It's not apathy, it's architecture. Your brain wasn't built for scale. It was built to protect those close to you. People you see. People who look like you, live like you, talk like you. That's where empathy lives. Outside that circle, it thins out. And beyond a certain point, it disappears. You know this already, don't you? You've felt it, the flicker of concern that fades before it becomes action. The moral discomfort that never grows loud enough to move your body. And you tell yourself it's not your fault. You're just one person. You can't save everyone. But that's not really the point. The point is how easy it is to justify harm when it happens far away. Bombs dropped on villages you'll never see. Sweatshops that sew the clothes you wear. Policies you support that devastate families in places you can't pronounce. The harm feels acceptable, even necessary, because you don't see it. You don't feel it. It doesn't interrupt your day. If the victim screamed in your ear, if they cried in front of you, would your decisions change? Would you still buy the product, vote the same, look away? Or would the weight finally be real? You start to understand how morality is filtered through proximity. A life here is worth more than a life there. A tragedy in your neighborhood is a horror. The same tragedy in a distant city is a statistic. We say all lives are equal, but we don't act like it. We never have. Now imagine this. Two people are dying. One is a stranger across the world. One is your sibling. You can only save one. The logic says, save the one with the most impact, the most need, the most potential. But logic doesn't matter. You already know who you'd choose. You tell yourself it's natural, human, understandable. But what if that instinct is the very thing that justifies every atrocity committed from a distance? What if that instinct is what allows cruelty to persist, not just in others, but in you? Because you're not evil. You don't wake up wanting to cause harm. You don't hate the people who suffer. You just don't think about them. You can't. There are too many. And so you learn to care selectively, to distribute empathy like a scarce resource, to save it for those who feel close, who feel real. You can't help it. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's what allows so much quiet horror to continue, because we all think we're too small, too far away, too powerless. And we wait for someone else to feel it more than we do. Someone closer, someone who will act, someone who will fix it. But no one ever does. And so the victim stays far away, and the harm becomes normal. Background noise, a low hum of cruelty beneath the surface of everything we do. And you keep telling yourself, it's not your fault, until the distance closes, until the harm comes near, until the scream is no longer faint. And then you wonder how long you've been standing still, how long you've been looking away, and whether someone else, somewhere far away, once did the same, while you were the one suffering, while your pain was muted by distance, while your life was measured in fractions. And suddenly, the silence feels heavier, the distance feels shorter, and you start to wonder if morality ever existed at all, beyond the narrow reach of your own skin. What if your favorite memory never happened? Not that you imagined it, not that you dreamed it, but that it was created, shaped, without your knowledge through stories you've heard, photos you've seen, or the way someone else described it. You remember the warmth, the joy, the vivid color of that day, but not because you lived it, because you inherited it. The line between real and false doesn't arrive with a warning. There's no alarm when memory quietly rewrites itself. It just happens. You hear a family story enough times, and one day it's yours. You remember how it felt to laugh in that kitchen, to cry in that hospital, even though none of it is actually your own. And when you realize this, it doesn't feel like a betrayal. It feels like a kind of erosion, like part of you is built on sand, and the tide has started coming in. Most people don't notice. Most people can't tell the difference. Your brain isn't a recording device, it's an interpreter. It doesn't store what happened. It stores what makes sense, what fits your story, what keeps the narrative smooth and coherent. The truth becomes whatever you need it to be, and the parts that don't serve that story, they fade. You might think your strongest memories are the most reliable, but it's often the opposite. The memories that matter most are the ones you've repeated, rehearsed, replayed, the ones you've polished. And every time you revisit them, you change them, just a little. You adjust the lighting. You sharpen the edges. You revise the dialogue. You sharpen the edges. You revise the dialogue. You edit the script until it tells the version of the past that you want to believe. And the more you tell the story, the more it becomes truth. Not real truth, but internal truth. Emotional truth. You can feel it in your chest, in your breath, in the way your eyes sting when you talk about it. But feeling something deeply doesn't make it accurate. It just makes it yours. Now imagine this applies to your happiest memory, the moment that shaped who you are, the moment you return to when things fall apart. What if that moment was built from errors, stitched together from second-hand fragments? What if the emotional foundation of your identity rests on something that never actually happened? There's no way to check. No one else sees your memories. No one else can verify what you recall. You might describe it, even swear by it, but your confidence isn't proof. It's just conviction. And conviction is often the enemy of accuracy. You begin to realize that memory isn't about truth. It's about meaning. Your mind doesn't care if the event happened exactly the way you recall. It cares that the event fits the story you need, that it explains your pain, that it validates your joy, that it gives your life coherence. And so you live surrounded by memories that may not be yours, not entirely, not honestly. They're close enough to feel real, but underneath them, there's uncertainty, a question you can't answer, and maybe you don't want to, because the alternative is worse. If your memory is unreliable, then who are you, really? If your past is made of revisions, what does that make the self who emerged from it? You think of yourself as a product of your experiences, but if your experiences aren't accurate, then maybe neither are you. You might feel tempted to dismiss this, to say that as long as the feeling is real, it doesn't matter. But that's another story, another illusion. You tell yourself it's fine because it's comforting to believe. But deep down, part of you starts to question everything, not just the distant past, but the recent past too. Did that conversation happen the way you remember? Did they actually say that? Were you truly the victim? Or have you retold it so many times that it's changed? You begin to wonder how many relationships were shaped by false memory. How many arguments started from events no one truly remembers. How many moments of love, betrayal, pride, or shame were altered just enough to become something else. You think back on your life, and it all starts to blur, not into forgetfulness, but into doubt. And maybe the most disturbing part is that you can't stop it. You can't will your brain to remember better. You can't hold on to facts like anchors. Even if you tried, your mind would still shape things, soften them, twist them gently over time, until even your efforts to stay accurate become distorted. So you're left in a strange place where the most important parts of your identity might be built on errors you'll never detect. You keep living, keep remembering, keep retelling, and the truth, whatever it was, fades further away with each passing day. And now, even this moment, this realization is becoming a memory, already shifting, already vulnerable to change. How do you explain confessing to a crime you didn't commit, not to someone else, to yourself? Imagine you're in an interrogation room. You're exhausted. You've been there for hours, maybe days. You haven't slept. You're cold, hungry. You've said the same thing over and over again, but they don't believe you, or they pretend not to. They're patient, kind even. They keep circling back to the same question. Not to trap you, not obviously. They just want to understand. They say things like, maybe you don't remember, or people make mistakes. At first you're sure you never did it, absolutely certain. But their questions keep coming. They show you pictures, notes, timelines. Some of it is wrong, some of it almost fits. You start doubting the details, then the sequence, then the feeling, then the whole story. What if you forgot something? What if you're blocking it out? They start describing how it might have happened. And at first you're defensive, but after a while, you start imagining it. Not as something you did, but as something that could have happened. You picture it in your mind. Their words become images. Their theory becomes a memory. Now you're not sure what's real. They say they have evidence. They don't show it, but they sound so certain. They say things that make too much sense. They know things they shouldn't. You wonder if your mind is playing tricks on you. You wonder if you're capable of something you didn't think you were. You start to feel guilty, not because you remember doing it, but because you don't remember not doing it. Because it's easier to imagine being guilty than to keep resisting. Because the pressure never stops, and they promise things. If you admit it, you can go home. If you cooperate, this can all end. And so you do. Not because it's true, but because you need it to be over. Because you've been broken down so far that truth and falsehood don't feel different anymore. They're just words you use to make things stop hurting. And once you say it, it becomes real. The words come out of your mouth, and now they belong to you. You hear yourself describing it. Details you didn't know. Feelings you never had. But now that they're spoken, you start to believe them. Or you try to. Because what's the alternative? To admit you said something false. To admit you betrayed yourself under pressure. To admit your own memory, your own identity, your own truth can be dismantled so easily. That would be even harder. So instead, you reshape your past to fit the confession. You reimagine yourself. You justify what you said. You start constructing a story that makes it all make sense. Even if none of it is real. Even if every part of you still knows, somewhere deep inside, that it was a lie. But that part gets quieter. It has to. Because if you listen to it, you'd have to face what you gave up. You'd have to acknowledge that you weren't strong enough, that you couldn't hold on to reality, that someone else reached into your mind and rewrote your truth. So you bury it. You live with the new story. Not because it's true, but because it's survivable. And the most disturbing part is that this isn't rare. It's common. You're more vulnerable than you think, more persuadable, more fragile, more eager to end pain, even at the cost of truth. You like to believe you'd never do this, that you'd resist, that you'd stand firm. But that belief only exists because you've never been tested the right way or the wrong way. You've never been kept awake long enough, never been pushed far enough, never been worn down moment by moment until you weren't sure where you ended and the pressure began. The real danger isn't being forced to lie, it's being led into it so slowly, so gently, that you start to believe it yourself. You stop fighting, not because you agree, but because you're tired, because you're human, because your mind wants comfort more than it wants truth. And in that moment, the lie becomes easier to live with than the truth. And that's how it happens. Not with violence, not with cruelty, but with quiet, persistent pressure, with kindness that feels like care, with exhaustion that steals your resistance. You don't confess because you're guilty. You confess because you're not strong enough to keep being innocent. What if every person around you looked up at the sky and insisted it was green? Not metaphorically, not philosophically, just a plain sky, blue, as you've always known it. But in this room, everyone swears it's green. They say it casually, confidently, as if it's obvious. And you stand there, confused, eyes wide open, seeing blue, but unsure what to do with that certainty. You speak up, quietly at first. It looks blue to me. They turn toward you, calmly, without anger, but with a kind of disappointed patience. No, they say. It's clearly green. Maybe you're tired. Maybe your eyes are off. It happens. A few people laugh. Not cruelly, just awkwardly, like you've made a mistake. They want to smooth over. You begin to question your own vision. Are you wrong? Is something wrong with you? Because somewhere inside, a voice starts whispering, they can't all be wrong, and that's when the shift begins. Not in the sky, in your mind. You look again, harder this time, searching for green. You can't find it, not really, but now, doubt creeps in. Maybe there's a tint. Maybe the light is strange. Maybe what you call blue is what they call green. You feel your grip on reality loosen. Not because the world changed, but because everyone else agreed it already had. This isn't about color. It never was. This is about how easily your mind bends under the weight of agreement. How fragile certainty becomes when it's not shared. You like to believe you're independent, rational, anchored to truth. But truth, it turns out, is social. And when consensus shifts, you shift too. The change is subtle. You don't suddenly believe the lie. You just stop arguing. You grow quiet. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that you still know the truth inside, that you're just going along to avoid conflict. But the longer you pretend, the more it sticks. Pretending becomes habit. Habit becomes belief. Belief becomes memory. And one day, you find yourself saying, without hesitation, that the sky is green. Not because you were forced to, but because somewhere along the way, you forgot how to stand alone. You conformed, not to survive, not under pressure, but out of something deeper, more invisible, the need to belong, the fear of exclusion, the slow, steady erosion of confidence in your own perception. Even now, you probably imagine you'd be the exception, that you'd hold firm while everyone else fell in line, that your mind is stronger, your will clearer, your values unshakable. But think carefully. When was the last time you truly stood alone? When was the last time you risked being the only one who saw something differently and said it anyway? Most people never do. Not because they're weak, but because the cost is too high. To see clearly, while others live in illusion, is isolating, disorienting. It makes the world colder, harsher, lonelier. So most people learn to look away, to accept the consensus, even when it feels wrong, to let truth become flexible. And slowly, what they once knew becomes what they used to doubt, and then forget entirely. What does that say about your beliefs, your memories, your moral positions? How many of them were shaped not by evidence or reason, but by the people around you? And if the group changed tomorrow, would you change too? You tell yourself you'd resist, that you'd hold on. But resistance isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it's a quiet refusal in the face of disapproval, a stillness while others turn, a voice that says no, even when it trembles. Most people never find that voice. They assume they'll use it when it matters. But by the time it matters, it's already gone. So when everyone turns to you and points at the sky, green, they say, green, you smile and nod. You don't mean to lie, you just don't want to stand alone again. And maybe for a moment, you still remember what blue looks like. But that memory fades, slowly, softly, and you never quite know when it disappears. Have you ever chosen pain just to escape silence? It sounds strange, irrational. Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone willingly hurt themselves when they could simply sit still? But the question isn't rhetorical. In one study, participants were asked to sit in a room alone without distractions for just 15 minutes. No phones, no books, no music, just them and their thoughts. And many of them, fully aware of the choice, chose to administer electric shocks to themselves instead. They knew it would hurt. They'd already experienced it. Yet, when left alone, with nothing but the contents of their own minds, they reached for pain. What does that say? Not about them, about us. Maybe about you. You've probably told yourself you value peace, that a quiet evening, free from distraction, is a kind of luxury. But how often do you actually allow yourself to be alone with nothing but your own mind, not half listening to music, not skimming a screen, not waiting for a notification, just still, silent, awake? You probably think you'd be fine, that the silence would be refreshing, that your thoughts would settle, that your mind would quiet. But they don't, because beneath everything else, there's a kind of noise you carry inside you all the time. Thoughts you avoid, memories you suppress, questions you don't want to answer. In silence, they rise up, not all at once, slowly, uncomfortably, like something turning over in the dark. At first, it's boredom, then restlessness. Then the tension builds, and that's when the temptation comes. Not for relief, but for distraction. For anything to interrupt the rising discomfort. Even if that interruption is pain, pain is simple, clear. It narrows your attention. It pulls you out of your mind and into your body. A shock, a cut, a burn, it's immediate, absolute. It gives you something else to feel, something that demands your focus, something that drowns out everything else. In that moment, pain feels safer than thought. This isn't about masochism. It's about avoidance. It's about how much effort you unconsciously put into escaping the one place you can never leave, your own mind. And it's not just electric shocks. You see it in other ways. People choosing toxic relationships over solitude, picking fights to break the silence, creating problems just to feel busy, needed, distracted. Pain becomes a tool, a defense, a way to hold off the moment where you're left alone with what you really think, what you really feel, what you really are. And maybe that's the scariest part. Not that people choose pain, but that they fear reflection more. Because when you're alone with your thoughts, you lose the scaffolding. There's no social role to play, no identity to perform, no feedback to adjust to. It's just you, without mirrors, without scripts, without noise. And that kind of exposure can be unbearable. You remember things you'd rather forget. You notice contradictions you usually ignore. You become aware of how uncertain you are, how inconsistent your beliefs are, how fragile your identity really is. And you start to understand that most of what you call yourself is maintained through constant distraction, through input, through narrative, through other people. Alone, the structure begins to collapse. Slowly, then all at once, and pain somehow holds it up. Even just for a moment, it gives you an anchor, something to orient around, a sensation that's real, undeniable, grounding, because thought, when unfiltered, becomes too abstract, too scattered, too threatening. You think about who you are, who you're not, who you could have been. You hear the quiet voice reminding you of the gap between your values and your actions. You feel the weight of everything unfinished, unresolved, unspoken. And so you reach for the shock. You wouldn't say that's what you're doing, of course. You tell yourself you're just restless, or curious, or testing the limits. But somewhere deeper, something inside you knows what it's trying to suppress, knows what it's trying to delay. And so the question becomes, what's worse, the pain you choose or the thoughts you avoid? Because one of them hurts for a moment, the other lingers, follows you, builds. Eventually, the avoidance costs more than the confrontation would have. But most people never get there. They just keep choosing the shock, and not because they want to suffer, but because they're afraid of what they might find if they didn't. What if I told you that a single sentence could change your childhood? Not just change how you remember it, but change what you remember. Who was kind to you? Who hurt you? What you saw? What you felt? All of it. You hear someone say, "Don't you remember how scared you were when your uncle came to visit?" And suddenly, you do. The memory appears, vague at first. A hallway, his face, your stomach turning. It wasn't there before, but now it is. You don't stop to wonder if it's real. It feels real, and feeling is enough. You never question it again. False memories don't need time to grow. They arrive fully formed, carrying the weight, the clarity, the emotional certainty of truth. And the more you recall them, the more real they become. The brain doesn't store memories like files. It rewrites them each time, adjusts, reinforces, replaces. You believe you're remembering, but you're rehearsing a story that might have never happened. And it doesn't take hypnosis, or brainwashing, or elaborate manipulation. Sometimes all it takes is someone asking the right question, with the right tone, at the right moment. Are you sure your father never hit you? You pause. You weren't sure before, but now you wonder. You imagine a moment. You see his face. Your skin flinches with a memory that might not be yours. You think this couldn't happen to you, that your memory is stable, grounded, immune to suggestion. But every study shows otherwise. Memory is not a record, it's a reconstruction. Each time you remember, you are not accessing the past. You are building a version of it, in the present. Which means your past, your most personal, intimate experiences, can be edited by someone else's words. And once that edit is made, there is no way to undo it. Because you don't remember the edit. You remember the memory. And you trust it more than anything. You say, "I know what I felt." But what if the feeling came after the suggestion? What if the emotion is the byproduct, not the proof? This doesn't just happen in therapy rooms or police interviews. It happens in families, in relationships, in quiet, unguarded conversations. Someone tells you, you are always the difficult one. You don't argue, you think back, and suddenly you remember tantrums, silence, conflict. But were those always your memories, or are they just the path your mind now takes, because it's easier than doubting the person who said it? And if one sentence can do that, can change how you remember yourself, what else might be false? How much of your identity is built on memories someone else created for you? You trust your memories. You have to. They feel like the only proof that you've lived. But now you wonder what part of you was written by accident, by implication, by suggestion. You think back to a painful memory. It feels clear, sharp, definite. But now you wonder if that sharpness is a symptom, not of its truth, but of how often you've recalled it, reinforced it, repeated it. Because the brain treats repetition as evidence. The more you recall something, the more certain it feels, even if it was never real to begin with. And this certainty is contagious. Once you believe a false memory, you act as though it's true. You tell others. You respond to people differently. Your present begins to change because of something that never actually happened. You don't even need someone else to plant the memory. Sometimes you do it to yourself. You ask, what if that time I felt unsafe, something really did happen? And your mind begins to fill in the gaps. Not to lie, but to protect you, to give you something to hold on to. And once it builds the picture, you never stop seeing it. You talk about trauma. You tell your story. You find meaning in the memory. And the meaning becomes more important than the accuracy. Because even if it's false, it gives you a narrative, a reason, a self. But what happens when the foundation of that self was never real? What happens when you realize your identity might be a story you rehearsed until you believed it? You feel the ground beneath your mind shift. Not because you've forgotten something, but because you no longer know if remembering means anything at all. And that's the deepest loss, not the memory, but the trust in your own mind. You can live without truth, but can you live without knowing whether you ever had it? Why does time feel faster now than it did when you were a child? Not in the poetic sense, not as a metaphor for nostalgia or memory, but in the most literal, mechanical way. A year at 10 felt endless. A summer lasted forever. Now entire months disappear without warning. You look back and can't remember how a whole season slipped past. And the strangest part is, this acceleration isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain has stopped caring. It isn't broken, it isn't malfunctioning, it's just efficient. It has learned to ignore what it already understands. Patterns, routines, familiar days, they stop registering as meaningful. The circuitry that once lit up from every small discovery has gone dim. What once felt new is now background noise. And the less attention your brain gives, the faster it lets go. You stop forming dense memories, so time compresses. Your days blur because your mind no longer finds them worth recording. The hours feel shorter, not because they are, but because your brain doesn't bother to notice them. You think back to childhood and remember how vivid everything felt. But that clarity didn't come from youth. It came from novelty. Every sensation was unfamiliar. Every experience required attention. You were forced to notice, to engage, to learn. And that created weight, texture, depth. You remember more, so time feels fuller. Now you wake, work, eat, sleep. You pass through days that all look the same, and your brain, trying to conserve energy, stops logging them. You still live them, but they don't stay. They vanish, almost immediately, like footsteps in water, and then something strange happens. You start to realize you've lost entire years of your life, not just in memory, but in feeling. You were alive, but not present. Awake, but not perceiving. You were there, but only vaguely, and you begin to wonder how much more you'll miss. How much more you'll skim past without knowing. You tell yourself it's because you're busy, distracted, stressed. But the truth is quieter, harder. Your brain has simply deprioritized your life. It has calculated that most of your experience is not worth remembering. And you agreed, you let it happen. You built a life on repetition. You pursued comfort, routine, predictability. You chose to eliminate friction, to make your days easier, smoother, simpler. And your brain followed your lead. It streamlined your perception. It stopped highlighting your life because you stopped demanding that it should. Even when something new appears, an unexpected event, a fleeting thrill, it vanishes quickly. Your mind glances at it, files it away, and moves on. The weight never returns. The richness stays gone. You tell yourself you'll remember the important things. But how many important things have already slipped away? You begin to feel disconnected from yourself, like you're watching your life from outside, like time is dragging you forward, faster and faster, while you try to slow down, to look around, to hold on. But you can't, not really, because the mechanism isn't external, it's inside you. And here's where the discomfort grows sharper. You realize that in order to slow time down again, you'd have to suffer. You'd have to do something unfamiliar, something uncomfortable. You'd have to feel disoriented, unsafe, lost. You'd have to shatter the routines that keep you numb, and you don't want that. You want time to slow down without having to change anything, without pain, without effort, without fear. But that isn't how it works. If you want to notice time, you have to notice your life. And if you want to notice your life, you have to make it matter. You have to pay attention again. Not just when it's easy or exciting, but when it's tedious, repetitive, frustrating. You have to fight your own brain's tendency to tune out. You have to choose awareness over and over, even when it's exhausting. And most people won't. Most people won't even try, because tuning out is easier. It's safer. It lets the days pass painlessly, even if they also pass invisibly. But what if they're right? What if awareness isn't worth the cost? What if remembering more means suffering more? What if the real reason time speeds up isn't because the brain fails, but because it protects? What if your brain doesn't stop caring out of laziness, but out of mercy? What if time feels faster, not because life is getting smaller, but because it's getting quieter, softer, more bearable? And what if the only way to stop it is to start hurting again? Would they do it? That person you trust, the one you think you know, the one who holds you when you're scared, who makes you laugh when you're low, who tells you they'd never hurt anyone. Would they? Not in cold blood, not for pleasure, but under pressure, when something vital is at stake, when fear takes over, when their world begins to collapse. Would they be capable of doing something unthinkable, not just capable? Would they do it without regret? It's easy to say no. We like to believe the people we love have lines they would never cross, that some instincts are fixed, that their sense of right and wrong is solid, unmoving, dependable. But morality, under stress, changes shape. It stretches, it frays, and sometimes it breaks. Consider what happens inside a human mind under extreme threat. Not imagined danger. Real danger, the kind that feels like a tightening noose, the kind that makes your breath shorten and your thoughts narrow into survival. When you're in that state, the question isn't what you believe, it's what you'll do to stop the fear. Imagine someone you love is threatened, their life hanging by a thread, and the only way to protect them is to cross a line you once thought sacred. Would you hesitate? Maybe. But for how long? Now flip it. Imagine they're the one facing that decision, not you. Picture them in a locked room, no one watching, no time to weigh options. Just panic, desperation, and the knowledge that if they don't act, they lose everything. Would they hesitate, or would they do what needs to be done and walk away from it, calmly, without looking back? You want to say they wouldn't. You want to believe that love makes people better. But stress doesn't always reveal our best selves. Sometimes it strips us down. Sometimes it shows who we are without the comfort of certainty. And what it reveals is rarely simple. Because under the right stress, the line between good and evil becomes thinner than you'd like to believe. And the person you trust most might cross it, not with rage, not with cruelty, but with quiet necessity. A calculated decision, an internal shift, no trembling hands, no second thoughts. Then what? Would you still love them? Would you still see them the same way? Could you even recognize them afterward? Or worse, would you understand them? Because maybe you'd do the same in their place. This is what makes it so disturbing. The realization that violence doesn't always come from monsters. It doesn't always look like hatred or malice. Sometimes it's ordinary, practical, detached, a means to an end, and sometimes it's done for love. You've heard of people committing terrible acts to protect their family, to escape abuse, to survive. And while it's easy to judge from the outside, the truth is, most of us have never been pushed far enough to know what we do. We like to think we have limits, but we don't test them. Not really. Stress changes people. It shrinks the world down to what matters most. And in that narrow space where everything else disappears, morality often becomes a luxury, a story we tell ourselves when we're safe. But safety is fragile. It can vanish in an instant, and when it does, who someone is may not matter as much as what they need. Now think of that person again, the one you love. Think of the way they smile, the sound of their voice, the small kindnesses they show you every day. Then imagine them calmly doing something terrible because the situation demanded it. And afterward, imagine them sleeping peacefully, convinced they did the right thing. That's the part that's hardest to face. Not just that someone you love could kill, but that they could do it and feel no guilt. That it wouldn't haunt them, that it would make sense to them, because it was necessary. And if that's true, then you don't really know who they are. Not completely. You know the version that exists under normal conditions. But under stress, real stress, they might become a stranger. And maybe that's the case for everyone. Maybe we're all strangers, even to ourselves, until something breaks. Maybe the person you love could become unrecognizable in a moment of crisis. And maybe you could too. And once you see that possibility, even for a second, you can't unsee it. You stop asking, could they? And start asking something quieter, more disturbing. What would it take? You meet someone for the first time, before they speak, before they move, before they do anything at all. Your mind has already decided what kind of person they are, not consciously, not carefully, not fairly. It takes under 7 seconds, sometimes less. And you're not even aware it's happening. A flash of their face, the way they hold their body, their skin, their clothes, their expression. Your brain absorbs it all instantly, and something inside you settles. A silent verdict. You'll say it's just a first impression, that it doesn't really matter. But it does. Because once that impression is made, it becomes the frame. Everything they do afterward gets filtered through it. If they're kind, you say they're polite. If they're cold, you say they're rude. Same action, different meaning, because of the judgment you already made. And this isn't rare. It's not a quirk. It's how human perception works. You judge quickly, automatically, irreversibly. Even when you tell yourself you're open-minded, even when you insist you're giving them a chance, you aren't. Not really. Worse still, this judgment isn't based on behavior. It's based on cues you don't control. Things you notice but can't explain. A certain shape of the face, a way of speaking, an unfamiliar accent. All of it gets mapped against patterns your brain has absorbed over a lifetime. Patterns filled with bias, fear, and learned associations. You didn't choose them, but they shape what you see. They shape what you feel. So when you meet someone new, you're not seeing them. You're seeing a distorted image created by your brain's need to categorize, to reduce complexity, to stay safe, and you trust this feeling. You call it instinct or a gut reaction. You believe it's truth, but it isn't. Now imagine how much of your life is built on this. Who you trust, who you avoid, who you listen to, who you ignore, who you love, who you fear. Every stranger you've ever dismissed, avoided, overlooked, every one of them might have been someone different. If you just looked a little longer, listened a little more, paused before deciding. But you didn't pause because you couldn't, because the judgment was already made, and everything afterward just confirmed it. You like to believe you're rational, that your opinions are shaped by evidence, by interaction, by reason. But how often do you really give people that chance? How often is your mind already made up before the conversation begins? You've done this your entire life, at work, at school, at home. You've judged people in an instant and treated them accordingly. And maybe you've forgotten. Maybe it didn't seem like a big deal. But to them, it might have been everything. The job they didn't get. The help they didn't receive. The friendship that never formed, all because of the 7 seconds you didn't know you were using. And sometimes, it's not even strangers. Sometimes it's people you've known for years. You judged them once, early, quietly, and ever since, you've only seen what supports that view. You don't notice what doesn't fit. You don't let it register, because it threatens the frame, and the frame feels safe. It makes the world simpler, predictable, understandable, but it also makes the world smaller, colder, less human. So now you have to ask yourself, who have you been wrong about? Who have you pushed away without realizing it? How many people have you never truly seen? Because maybe the unsettling truth isn't that we judge too quickly, it's that we judge permanently. And every moment we think we're being fair, we're really just protecting the decision we already made long before we ever knew them at all. And maybe that's why it's so hard to change your mind about someone. Because to see them clearly, you'd have to admit that you never really saw them in the first place. Why do people believe what he says? Just because he says it like that. He doesn't offer evidence, he doesn't cite sources, he just speaks with certainty, calm, direct, unflinching. And somehow that's enough. People nod, they agree, they follow. Not because what he says is proven, but because it sounds like it is. You notice this more once you start looking. The way a confident voice holds weight in a conversation. The way unwavering eye contact feels like authority. The way hesitation, even with the truth behind it, makes people uncomfortable. They want answers, not questions. Clarity, not nuance. So when someone speaks with perfect certainty, even about something false, people lean in. When someone tells the truth, but stumbles, hesitates, softens it, they're doubted. As if uncertainty means dishonesty. As if being unsure means being wrong. But it goes deeper than that. Confidence feels safe. It mimics leadership, competence, intelligence. It feels like control. And most people are drawn to the feeling of being led, especially when they're scared, or uncertain, or overwhelmed. The truth doesn't always provide that. Truth is often messy, complicated, filled with context and contradiction. It comes slowly, hesitantly, with caveats. Real knowledge includes its limits. A person who understands something deeply will often sound unsure because they know how much they don't know. But that kind of humility is quiet, subtle. It doesn't command attention. It doesn't feel strong. So people dismiss it. They say someone seems unsure or doesn't inspire confidence, even if they're the only one in the room telling the truth. And the one who lies, if he lies with conviction, will be the one who wins trust. You've seen this happen. Maybe in politics, maybe in your workplace. Someone speaks boldly, forcefully, without evidence. And people listen. They don't just believe him, they believe in him. And even when he's caught in a lie, they forgive it. Because they still trust how he made them feel. They never noticed that their trust was never in the truth. It was in the delivery. And now you start to question yourself. Have you done the same? Have you trusted people, not because they earned it, but because they seemed like they should be trusted? Have you ignored warnings, doubts, red flags, simply because someone said something with conviction? Have you ever believed a lie, not because it sounded true, but because it sounded confident? And then it gets worse. You begin to wonder what would happen if you were the one who had to speak the truth. What if you had to share something real, but uncertain, complex, hard to prove? Would anyone listen? Would anyone believe you? Or would they ignore you, in favor of someone louder, clearer, more sure? You start to see how this plays out everywhere. In conversations, in media, in courtrooms, in classrooms. The one who speaks boldly is believed. The one who hesitates, who reflects, who admits doubt, gets pushed aside. It doesn't matter what's real, it matters who sounds like they believe themselves. So truth becomes fragile, weak, dependent on charisma, tone, posture, and lies become powerful, if delivered well. And now you see the trap. If you want to be believed, you must sound confident, even if you aren't, even if you shouldn't. Because no one wants to follow someone who says, I think. They want someone who says, I know. But what if you don't know? What if you're trying to be honest about uncertainty? What if you're still learning, still questioning, still unsure? You'll be ignored or corrected or overruled. Not because you're wrong, but because you don't sound right. And the person who does sound right, who speaks without doubt, will become the voice people trust. Even if everything they say is false, so the lie wins. Not because it was believed, but because it was delivered with confidence and the truth fades. Not because it was disproven, but because it was spoken too softly. What if you're not who you think you are? Not because you're secretly someone else or living in a simulation, but because your own brain won't let you see yourself clearly. It edits the world around you. It filters your memories, bends your perceptions, reshapes your past, not to deceive you, but to protect you from something it believes is more dangerous than any lie. Shame, humiliation, self-blame, failure, guilt. These things threaten your sense of identity more than almost anything else. And so, without permission, your mind starts changing the narrative. Not out of malice, not even out of weakness, but because it's the only way to keep you functional. It starts small. You forget how much something hurt. You remember yourself acting better than you really did. You tell yourself they misunderstood or that it wasn't entirely your fault. These aren't lies in the traditional sense. You believe them fully, and that's what makes them effective. Your mind isn't trying to help you become better. It's trying to keep you intact. It would rather you feel consistent than accurate. Rather you believe you're a good person than confront evidence that you're not. Because once you begin to doubt your own goodness, everything else starts to fall apart. This isn't just a glitch. It's a system. Confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance, motivated reasoning, they're not flaws in the code. They are the code. Your brain doesn't record reality like a camera. It edits like a movie studio, trimming what doesn't fit the plot, rewriting dialogue, reshaping motivations until the final version feels emotionally satisfying, even if it's false. You've done things you shouldn't have. Hurt people, acted out of pride, cowardice, resentment. But you remember those moments differently. You downplay the damage, emphasize your reasons. You imagine the other person was overreacting, that they would have done the same in your position. And maybe they would have, but that's not the point. The point is that you need to believe you're the hero of your own story, even when you're not. Especially when you're not. But the cost of that belief is steep, because every time your brain hides something from you, it becomes harder to change, harder to grow. You can't fix what you can't see, and so you remain stuck, repeating patterns, making the same mistakes, chasing the same hollow victories, all while telling yourself you're learning, you're evolving, you're doing your best, and maybe you are. But what if your best is just another illusion? Think about the last time you truly faced your own failure, not a surface-level mistake, a deep, undeniable fault, the kind that makes you feel sick when you're alone, the kind that keeps you awake, staring at the ceiling, wishing you could go back and do it differently. Now ask yourself, did you actually change after that moment? Or did you just find a way to explain it to yourself? A version of the story that felt more comfortable, one that let you move on without really confronting what it said about you. This is what your brain does. It doesn't erase the truth. It buries it. Layers of rationalization, memory distortion, self-serving reinterpretation. And the deeper it goes, the harder it becomes to recognize. You might believe you're self-aware, that you've looked into the mirror and seen yourself clearly. But how can you know if the part of your mind responsible for perception is the same part editing what you see? What does self-awareness even mean? It's like trying to watch your own eyes. You can turn in every direction, but never inward. And this protection doesn't only distort the past, it warps the present, too. In a disagreement, you feel misunderstood, not because you are, but because your brain amplifies your intentions and mutes the impact of your actions. When someone criticizes you, it feels unfair, even when it isn't. You look for flaws in them to protect yourself from the possibility that they might be right. Because if they're right, then maybe you're not who you think you are. And that idea, that quiet, creeping doubt, is terrifying. You've built an identity, a sense of self, values, memories, beliefs, and all of it rests on the assumption that your perception is mostly accurate. But if your mind has been curating reality this entire time, then how much of your identity is real? What if your confidence is just well-rehearsed denial? What if your resilience is just selective memory? What if your goodness is just a carefully constructed illusion? You don't need to be a liar to live a lie. You just need to be human. You just need a brain that prioritizes comfort over truth. And maybe, right now, it's doing it again. As you listen to this, you might already be pushing back, telling yourself this doesn't apply to you, that you're different, more honest, more self-aware. But that's part of the process too, that resistance you're feeling, that urge to defend yourself, to explain, to reject. It's not clarity, it's ego. It's the very mechanism being described. It's the part of you that needs to be right, needs to be good, needs to be innocent. But what if you're not? What if you're not the person you think you are? And what if the only thing protecting you from that truth is the lie your brain is still telling you? How can someone say something horrifying in a way that makes you want to agree with them? They don't raise their voice. They don't pound the table or twist the facts. They just speak softly, clearly, as if they're explaining something obvious. They sound calm, reasonable, like they're trying to help you understand. And maybe they are, but what they're asking you to understand is wrong. Deeply, quietly, unmistakably wrong. and you feel it, not all at once, but slowly. First in your chest, then in your stomach. That creeping sense that something's off, that what's being said doesn't match what's being felt. But the words themselves, they make sense. The logic is clean, the tone is soothing, and that's the trap. Because when someone speaks calmly, we listen differently. Our guard drops, we confuse stillness for safety, clarity for goodness. If they were shouting, if they were angry, we'd resist. But a calm voice disarms us. It makes the idea feel like something we've already accepted, like something we should have known all along. And if the voice isn't just calm but kind, if it sounds concerned for you, for others, then it becomes harder to say no. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sounds like someone trying to help, trying to make things easier, trying to explain why a hard thing is necessary. Sometimes it sounds like, we didn't want to do this, but we had no choice. Or this isn't about punishment, it's about protection. Or it's better for everyone this way. You'll see. And you do see, that's what makes it worse. Because once the words are in your mind, they start rearranging things. You begin to think in their structure, follow their rhythm. You start saying them yourself, quietly in your own head, until the line between agreement and repetition disappears. And you don't feel evil. You feel rational, thoughtful. You feel like you've finally stepped back far enough to see the whole picture. But what you're really seeing is a version of the world where cruelty becomes acceptable as long as it's explained well enough. That's how it happens. That's how a horrifying idea becomes part of your thinking. Not because you believed it was good, but because it stopped sounding bad. It started sounding normal. And once something sounds normal, it becomes hard to notice at all. You stop asking questions. You stop pulling the thread. You stop noticing who's missing, who's suffering, who's being left out of the story. You start to think of them as part of the cost. A sad part maybe, but a necessary one. And the calm voice agrees. It always agrees. You tell yourself that if something was truly wrong, you'd feel it more strongly. You'd know. But the longer you listen, the less you feel. The voice smooths over your doubts, your instincts, your sense of discomfort, until one day you hear something truly cruel, and it no longer shocks you. It sounds reasonable, and maybe you even nod, and that's the moment you should fear most. Not when evil is loud and obvious, but when it feels quiet and correct. When it wears the language of care, when it speaks like a friend, because that's when it's already inside you. You won't notice the change, not at first. You'll just feel more certain, more resolved, like you've outgrown the naivety of guilt, like you're finally seeing things as they are. But that feeling, that clarity, isn't a sign of truth. It's a symptom of something else, a flattening of empathy, a hollowing of doubt. And once that part of you is gone, it doesn't come back easily. So the next time something sounds perfectly logical, perfectly calm, perfectly safe, listen carefully, not to the words. To yourself, ask what part of you is being quieted in order to make room for this idea. Ask who benefits from your agreement. Ask what you're being asked to stop feeling, because evil rarely needs to shout. It only needs to sound like something you don't want to argue with. If everyone you knew died right now, the world would keep going. Traffic wouldn't stop. Grocery stores would stay open. The sun would rise exactly when it's supposed to. No announcement would echo across the sky. No silence would fall over the earth. Your entire circle, family, friends, co-workers, the people who greet you by name, the ones who love you, gone. And yet the world would move forward, undisturbed. At first, this might sound obvious. Of course the world doesn't stop. But think about what that really means. The people who make your life feel real are not necessary for the world to function. Their laughter, their conversations, their presence, it means everything to you and nothing to anyone else. You could be holding their bodies, screaming, collapsing, and the neighbor's dog would still bark like it always does. Delivery drivers would still bring packages. Somewhere, someone would still be falling in love, completely unaware of the vacuum that just opened inside your life. People wouldn't understand. They'd say the right things, send flowers, offer help. But then they'd go home, cook dinner, watch TV, because your loss isn't their loss. Your world has ended. Theirs hasn't changed. You might walk through the city, surrounded by people who don't know that every face you loved has disappeared, that your identity has no anchors left, that every memory you've ever made is now sealed inside a box that no one else can open. There would be no warning, no signal that everything was about to dissolve. One moment, you're surrounded. The next, you're a ghost with a heartbeat, drifting through a world that looks the same but has no place for you anymore. You could try to explain it, try to make someone understand the scale of the absence. But grief that large makes people uncomfortable. They want you to heal, to move forward, to reintegrate. But there's nothing to return to. There's no normal left to resume. You would look around and realize that your memories, the private moments, the shared jokes, the details only they remembered, are all orphaned now, detached from context, meaningless to everyone else. And the hardest part is this: the world isn't cruel for moving on. It's not malicious. It's just indifferent. The same way it was before you were born, and the same way it will be after you're gone. It doesn't slow down to accommodate your pain. It doesn't rearrange itself because your heart stopped working properly. The economy continues. The seasons change. Birthdays are celebrated. And you, sitting with the aftermath, become an oddity, a strange reminder that love and loss are not mutually binding, that the existence of one does not protect you from the erasure of the other. You might find yourself wondering if the people who died even mattered, not to you, you know they did, but to the rest of this machine. If every trace of their existence can vanish without slowing the gears, were they ever real outside of your perception? And then it gets darker. You realize the same is true for you. If you vanished right now, if your heart stopped, your body collapsed, your name disappeared from every inbox, the world would keep going, just as easily, just as smoothly. Someone would clean up. Someone would inherit your responsibilities. Your absence would be absorbed, diluted, then forgotten. Even those who loved you would eventually have to keep living, laugh again, make new memories. The space you occupied would quietly close around itself. And it's not because you don't matter, it's because everything adapts. Loss is survivable, even the kind that feels like it shouldn't be. You spend your life weaving relationships, collecting moments, building identity through connection. And then, with enough time, every one of those threads can snap, and the world doesn't fray, it just continues. This isn't meant to depress you. It's not a call to despair. It's a recognition of how fragile significance is, how quickly meaning can collapse when it's only supported by human presence. And maybe what's most uncomfortable is the thought that you've known this all along, that some part of you already suspected your life wasn't as anchored as you thought. That love doesn't insulate you from disappearance, it just makes it hurt more when it happens. So when you ask yourself what would happen if everyone you knew died right now, don't imagine chaos. Imagine stillness. A calm world operating normally, while you fall apart in the middle of it. Because the truth isn't that life goes on, it's that it never needed you to begin with. Why do you care more about a rumor than a verified fact? You might tell yourself it's not true, that you value evidence, that you're drawn to the truth. But your behavior says otherwise. You listen more intently when someone tells you something secret. You feel a spike of interest when you hear a name whispered in a sentence that ends in scandal. You may not even believe the rumor, but that doesn't matter. You still want to hear it. You still lean in. Gossip pulls you in without effort. Facts require work. Gossip is fast, emotional, social. It gives you a role, a connection, a shared reaction. Facts are cold. They don't flatter your instincts or invite your opinion. They just are. Silent, static, alone. And the strange part is that you know this. You can feel the difference, but it doesn't stop you. You're wired to want what gossip gives you. Belonging, relevance, a sense of superiority. Even outrage can feel rewarding. A good rumor lights up the same parts of your brain that respond to food, to touch, to validation. It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters that it feels meaningful, that it moves people, that it gives you something to hold. This wasn't a choice. It's part of the structure. Your brain evolved in small tribes, where knowing what others were doing, who was cheating, who was rising, who was falling, those things kept you alive. Social knowledge wasn't entertainment. It was survival. Knowing who to trust, who to avoid, who to challenge, who to follow, that was more important than knowing what was factually true. A false rumor could still keep you safe if it changed behavior. A truth, if ignored by the group, could get you killed. So, that's where it started. But it didn't stop. You've carried that wiring into a world where it no longer fits. A world flooded with information, where facts can be verified, archived, and shared, but where they still lose to the emotional grip of unverified whispers. Because your body doesn't care what's accurate. It cares what feels urgent, what feels connected, what feels like power. Even when you think you're above it, you're not. You might tell yourself you only listen out of curiosity, or to stay informed. But the truth is simpler. You listen because it feels good. You share because it feels right. You repeat because it feels necessary. And somewhere along the way, the boundary between feeling and knowing collapses. And then something worse happens. You begin to forget that there's a difference. You start treating emotionally satisfying stories as reality. You trust your reactions more than your sources. You hear a claim and instantly assess whether it fits your worldview, your fears, your hopes. If it does, it feels true. If it doesn't, it feels false. The facts become irrelevant. They've already lost. You may think you're making judgments, that you're weighing information critically. But most of the time, you're not. You're just scanning for emotional resonance, for alignment. You're not asking, is this true? You're asking, does this make sense to me? Does it feel like the kind of thing someone like them would do? Someone like me would say. And once it passes that test, you believe it. Or at least you act as though you do. And that's enough. This isn't an insult. It's an explanation. It's how you're built. But understanding it doesn't free you from it. Because once you realize how easily you're moved by social cues and emotional hooks, you're left with something even more unsettling. The knowledge that you might never really want the truth at all. Because the truth often arrives quietly, without drama. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't make you feel connected or righteous. It just asks to be seen. And that's not enough. Not when you've been trained over thousands of years to respond to stories that spread, not ones that sit still. So now you're left in a strange position. You may have access to more facts than anyone in history, but your instincts still reach for the story that moves, that connects, that circulates. Not because it's true, but because it lights you up. And what does that say about the choices you make, about the things you believe, about the world you help shape? Every time you choose to share something that feels right over something you know is true, it says that truth by itself is not enough. Not for you, not for anyone. And that, maybe deep down you already know this. Maybe you've already stopped looking for truth and just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. What if the thing that made you feel worse was doing something kind? Not because it failed, not because it backfired, but because no one noticed. You helped, you gave, you sacrificed time, energy, maybe even pride, and when it was over, nothing. No thanks, no recognition, not even acknowledgement that it happened. You tell yourself that shouldn't matter. You didn't do it for praise. You remind yourself that real generosity is quiet, humble, unseen. But something inside you tightens. Not because you wanted a reward, just because being invisible feels like erasure. It's not that you regret helping. It's that the absence of acknowledgement makes the act feel hollow. You start questioning whether it meant anything at all, whether your effort actually mattered, whether the people you helped even noticed there was something to notice. And slowly, without wanting to, you begin to feel something else. Resentment, quiet, shapeless. It lingers at the edges. You don't want to admit it. You still believe kindness is important. But part of you feels used, not by someone malicious, just by the silence that followed. And then it gets worse, because you realize how much of your identity is tied to being helpful. You pride yourself on being dependable, kind, supportive, someone who shows up. But when that identity goes unacknowledged, unnoticed, unrewarded, it starts to fracture. You wonder, if no one sees it, is it even there? If no one benefits in a way that reflects back on you, did it happen the way you thought it did? It's easy to say the right thing, that kindness should be its own reward, that doing good in secret is the highest form of goodness. But the truth is harder. The truth is, we are social creatures. We need feedback. We need mirrors. Without them, we lose track of ourselves. You tell yourself you don't need thanks. But then why does the absence feel like grief? Maybe it's because kindness, unacknowledged, starts to feel like weakness. Not morally, but emotionally. You gave something of yourself, and it vanished, disappeared into someone else's day, like it didn't cost you anything at all. And now you hesitate. The next time someone needs help, you pause, not because you've stopped caring, but because you remember how it felt. You remember the emptiness, the invisible wound. This is the hidden cost of compassion. Not that it's exhausting, but that it's unrewarded. You expect nothing. You ask for nothing. But when nothing comes, it still hurts. You might try to fight it, to double down, to give more, help more, prove to yourself that your goodness doesn't depend on validation. But over time, that fight becomes its own form of resentment. You start doing kindness like it's a test, a quiet dare to the world. Will anyone notice this time? Then when they don't, it reinforces the pain. It confirms your worst suspicion. Not that people are ungrateful, but that your efforts are forgettable. That no matter how much you give, it never really changes how anyone sees you. Eventually, you pull back, not all at once, just slightly. A little less available, a little more guarded. You still want to help, but only when it feels safe, only when it won't disappear into silence again. But here's the part you don't say out loud. You don't just want to be seen, you want to matter. You want the people you help to pause, even briefly, and realize that what you did was a choice, not a given, that you didn't owe them your help, that you chose to give it. And when that choice goes unrecognized, it doesn't just feel thankless. It feels like you were never really a person to them. Just a function, a convenience, something forgettable and replaceable. That's what makes it hurt, not the act of helping, but the realization that your kindness doesn't make you any more visible than you were before. And the longer this happens, the more you begin to question your motives. You wonder if you were ever kind or just addicted to the feeling of being seen as kind. But even that question feels cruel, because it suggests that seeking recognition is impure, that the need to be acknowledged is somehow shameful, as if your goodness only counts if it's invisible. But maybe that's the real trap. Maybe we're not supposed to erase ourselves to be good. Maybe the expectation that we should give endlessly, silently, without needing anything in return, that's the lie. That's the thing that breaks you. And when you're broken, no one sees it, because you're still helpful, still kind, still dependable. Just quieter now, just sadder, just slightly more gone, and they still don't notice. Have you ever flinched at a memory that didn't actually happen? A crash that never occurred, a fall that didn't reach the ground, a knife slicing through nothing but thought. And still, your heart races. Your breath shortens, your body tightens. Pain that never touched you somehow lives in you. And it's not just fear, it's pain, real pain, registered by the same circuits that would have lit up if it had actually happened, the same neural pathways, the same regions. The brain doesn't always wait for injury to feel injured. You don't need to be burned to feel burned. You just need to believe it's happening, or remember when it almost did, or imagine it, clearly enough, deeply enough, because to your brain, that's enough. And maybe that's the problem, because if your brain doesn't always care whether the pain is real or imagined, then neither does your body. It reacts the same way. Tension, inflammation, exhaustion. It prepares to defend itself against something that doesn't exist, and it suffers for it. It's easy to think of pain as physical, obvious, measurable, but most of the pain people carry is quiet, hidden, never spoken, never even touched. What happens when the worst pain you feel comes from something that hasn't happened yet? When your suffering doesn't come from the past, but from a future you've imagined over and over again. When you rehearse a trauma so vividly that your body lives it again and again, even though it never arrives, you start to realize the mind doesn't protect you from pain. Sometimes it's the one causing it. You don't need a broken bone or open wound to fall apart. All you need is a thought you can't stop thinking, a scene you can't stop replaying, a fear so loud it drowns out everything else. It's not weakness, it's not irrational, it's how you're built. The human brain evolved to anticipate, to predict, to simulate threats before they happen. That's what kept your ancestors alive. But it's also what keeps you anxious, tense, tired, waiting for a blow that never lands. You start living in a world that hasn't happened, reacting to dangers that only exist inside your head. And because the pain feels real, the damage becomes real. People don't collapse from fantasy. They collapse from the body's response to that fantasy. Your immune system doesn't know the difference. Neither does your cardiovascular system, or your sleep, or your appetite. You suffer biologically for things that never occurred. And that raises a question you can't easily escape. If imagined pain can scar you like the real thing, what else can you not trust? What else in your body is reacting to ghosts? You might tell yourself it's harmless, just thoughts, just memories, just fears. But if those thoughts activate the same brain centers as real trauma, then they are trauma. They are injury, just invisible ones. Ones you can't show anyone, ones that no scan will detect. But you feel them. Every day, every time you avoid a place, or a person, or a memory. Every time your breath catches, or your chest tightens, or your stomach sinks, without warning, without reason, you tell yourself it's irrational, but your brain disagrees. It believes the danger is real, so it makes the pain real too. And now you're caught in a loop. The more vividly you imagine the pain, the more your brain wires itself to feel it. And the more you feel it, the more convinced you are that something is wrong. But maybe nothing ever happened, not in the way you think. Maybe the injury isn't in the past. Maybe it's in the rehearsal. Maybe you've hurt yourself by preparing too well. You wanted to be ready, so you imagined every scenario, every threat, every betrayal, every failure. You tried to protect yourself, and in doing so, you made yourself bleed, not on the outside, but where it counts. And now, every time you try to think your way out, you only dig deeper. Because your brain doesn't stop to check if something is real before it reacts. It just responds. And in that response, it shapes the body, shapes memory, shapes identity. You begin to wonder how much of your suffering is injury and how much is preparation for injury that never came. You begin to see how thin the line is between caution and self-harm, between memory and imagination, between pain you survived and pain you rehearsed until it felt the same. And maybe that's the most unsettling truth of all, that your mind, in trying to protect you, has made you suffer more than the world ever did. And it will keep doing so as long as you trust your fear more than your reality. But what if you can't tell the difference anymore? What if the fear has become the reality? Then the pain wins, quietly, completely, forever. What if someone hurt your family and didn't feel anything? Not rage, not regret, not the quiet ache of remorse. Just nothing. They stood there, calmly, watching what they did, unaffected. Maybe they even smiled. What would you do with that? How do you punish someone who doesn't feel guilt? Most people imagine guilt as a universal thread, that no matter who you are, if you cross a certain line, if you inflict enough pain, your conscience will catch up. It might take time, it might hide beneath denial or self-justification, but eventually it's supposed to come. But that isn't true. There are people walking around right now who have never once felt guilt, not as children, not as adults, not even when they know they've hurt someone deeply. Not even when they destroy lives. For them, morality is not internal. It's a script they memorize to blend in. They can describe guilt, imitate it, pretend to feel it when the situation calls for it. But there's nothing behind their eyes when they say, "I'm sorry." It's a performance, carefully practiced. And for a long time, you might believe them, because they learn how to mimic sincerity. They study the way others react. When to look down, when to pause, how to cry without tears. But it's hollow. And if you watch closely, you'll see the gaps. The moment the apology ends, the eyes return to blankness. The empathy vanishes. There's no weight behind their words because they've never carried that weight before. What happens when someone like that causes harm? You expect guilt to act like gravity, to pull them back, to make them stop. But it never does. And the longer you wait for it, the more confused you feel. You start doubting yourself. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe it was your fault. But the truth is simpler. There's nothing broken in them to fix. There was never guilt to begin with. You assume people regret things when they realize they've caused pain. But some people never make that connection. Or worse, they make it, and they enjoy it. They enjoy the control, the confusion, the power it gives them. And if they're especially good at pretending, you won't see it until it's too late. You'll ask them, years later, "Don't you feel bad?" And they'll look at you calmly and say, "No," not angrily, not defiantly, just plainly, as if you'd asked whether they were hungry. And in that moment, something in you will shift. You'll feel alone in a way you've never felt before, because you'll realize that the thing you relied on, Guilt, empathy, conscience isn't a given. It isn't built into everyone. Some people never got it, and nothing you do can make them feel it. They can harm you, watch you cry, watch you fall apart, and feel nothing but mild annoyance that you're still upset. And yet, you keep expecting them to feel something, because you need them to. Because if they don't, then what does that mean about what they did? What does it mean about the value of your pain? It means it was real. It means it mattered, just not to them. And that's the most disorienting part, that someone can cause devastation and then walk away unchanged, not haunted, not ashamed, just done. You tell yourself there must be a consequence, that if they don't feel guilt now, they will later. But what if that moment never comes? What if guilt isn't something people grow into, but something they either have or don't? Then what? You can't appeal to their conscience. You can't reason with their emotions. You can't hope for redemption, because redemption requires regret, and there is no regret. There never was. And now you're not just grieving what happened. You're grieving the fact that the person who caused it will never carry any of the pain with you. You carry it alone. And every time you try to make sense of it, to find the lesson, to find the reason, all you find is a blank space, a silence where remorse should be. And eventually you stop asking them to feel anything, not because you've forgiven them, but because you've accepted something colder, something harder to live with. You've accepted that some people can do terrible things and sleep soundly forever. Would you swerve to hit a stranger if it meant saving your dog? That's not just a hypothetical. In real experiments, when asked to choose between running over a human stranger or their own dog, a shocking number of people hesitated or chose the dog, not because they don't understand the stakes, but because the math of morality breaks down when emotions step in. You don't like to think of yourself this way. You believe human life is more important. You believe that, faced with a clear choice, you'd always do the right thing. But in that moment, when the choice is real, not imagined, your feelings don't always follow the rules. You picture your dog, its face, the moments you've shared, the way it trusts you without question. Then you picture a stranger, faceless, nameless, just a body. And suddenly the equation isn't so simple. You might try to justify it. Tell yourself the stranger could be dangerous, that your dog depends on you, that the stranger had bad luck, that you're loyal, but none of that changes the truth. You're choosing comfort, familiarity, attachment. You're choosing love over logic. Maybe you think this is unique to pets, but it isn't. This is how the human mind works. We protect what we know, what we care about, what belongs to us, and we turn cold when faced with distant suffering. That's why you'll cry over a dying pet, but scroll past headlines about war, famine, genocide. That's why you feel more when a friend loses their job than when thousands do, in a country you've never seen. It's not because you're cruel, it's because empathy isn't rational. It's spatial, emotional, personal. You care about the people, the beings that feel real to you. The closer they are, the more they matter. The further they are, the more they become numbers. And morality isn't immune to this. You think your ethics are built on principles, fairness, compassion, equality, but often they're just extensions of your emotions. Your principles vanish the moment they conflict with your attachments. You'll fight for fairness until fairness means losing something you love. You'll speak of compassion until compassion threatens your safety. You'll defend human life until that life is a stranger's. Even in the smallest ways, this truth shows itself. You'll break rules for friends, bend honesty for family, overlook wrongs when they come from someone you love. But when it's someone else, a stranger, then the rules matter again. Then you demand consistency. Then you remember what's right. This contradiction isn't rare, it's constant, and it gets worse when the stakes rise. Think of organ donation. Millions need transplants, but very few sign up, not because they're unaware, but because it's someone else's problem. Think of charity, disaster, crisis. You might give when the story moves you, when it feels close, but most of the time you don't, not because you don't care, but because it's too far away to feel. Now think about the people you do help. Friends in trouble, pets in pain, a lost dog on the street. These stir something in you that a headline never could. Not because they're more deserving, but because they're present, real, emotional. That's the truth. Most people can't admit that you'd rather save what you love than what's fair, that you'd rather protect what's close than what's right, that morality, when tested, often gives way to instinct. And you start to see how fragile it all is, how your sense of right and wrong can flip with nothing more than a face, a voice, a feeling. You believe in ethics until they ask you to sacrifice something you care about. Then you rationalize, because at the edge of every moral stance is a quiet fear that if the roles were reversed, if your loved one were on the line, you wouldn't stand by your values, you'd protect them, no matter the cost. You imagine yourself noble, selfless, just, but deep down you know, you'd save the dog, not because it's right, but because it's yours. And that's what disturbs you most. Not that people do it, but that, if the moment came, you probably would too. What do you feel when someone tells you they don't feel guilt? Not just in theory, but in practice. No remorse after hurting someone. No anxiety after lying. No shame, even when caught. Most people recoil at this. We imagine it as cold, inhuman, something broken or missing. Psychopaths, we call them. Dangerous, unfeeling, other. But that's not quite right. The truth is harder to face, because the line separating you from them isn't where you think it is. It's not about empathy. It's not about having a conscience. It's about what happens when nothing stops you. Most people don't commit terrible acts, not because they're incapable, but because they're afraid of consequences, of rejection, of being seen. We like to believe we're good because we feel guilt. But guilt isn't morality. Guilt is a signal, a tool. It tells you what you've been trained to avoid. Now take that signal away. Imagine you never learned to associate certain actions with shame. Not because you're evil, but because your environment didn't demand it. Would your behavior change? Probably. Would you notice? Probably not. That's what disturbs people about psychopaths. Not their violence, but their calm, their ease. The way they operate without the emotional friction that slows everyone else down. But that calm isn't unique. You have it too, in certain moments. In specific contexts, you've lied without guilt. You've hurt without regret. Maybe you were justified. Maybe it was small, but it happened. And here's the uncomfortable part. The traits we associate with psychopathy, manipulativeness, superficial charm, lack of remorse, they're not confined to psychopaths. They're on a spectrum you are already on. Think of the times you've used someone's weakness to your advantage. When you pretended to care just enough to get what you wanted. When you ignored someone's pain because it was inconvenient. You didn't feel evil. You felt normal. You felt justified. That's the point. Psychopaths don't wear signs. They blend in. They mirror emotions. They mimic concern. They adapt to survive. But so do you. You've smiled when you didn't mean it, faked empathy in conversations, stayed silent when you saw something wrong because it was easier. Does that make you a bad person? No, it makes you human. But it also makes you closer to the edge than you think. The real difference is scale, intensity, frequency. A psychopath feels less guilt more often. You feel less guilt only sometimes. But what happens in those moments? What are you capable of when the guilt is gone? Consider this. Studies show that in high-power positions, the rate of psychopathic traits increases dramatically. CEOs, politicians, surgeons, not because those jobs attract evil, but because they reward detachment. They select for calm under pressure. Traits we admire, traits you might even aspire to. So the question isn't whether you're like a psychopath. The question is what parts of yourself you're willing to notice, what behaviors you're willing to explain away. You've made decisions that benefited you at someone else's expense. You've rationalized selfishness. You've ignored harm you could have stopped. And when the guilt fades fast, you tell yourself it was necessary. You tell yourself it was fair. But what if the only difference between you and someone you fear is how often you need to justify it? What if the calm, calculating side of you, the one that detaches, that compartmentalizes, that moves on, isn't an aberration but a foundation? And what if the part of you that feels remorse is just a thin layer on top? You don't have to be dangerous to lack guilt. You just have to be focused, goal-oriented, efficient. You just have to learn which feelings to shut off and which ones to simulate. That's the part that frightens people. The idea that someone could act without remorse, but the scarier thought is this, that you already do. That under the right conditions, without even noticing, you slide into it naturally. Because guilt isn't what stops you, it's what shows up afterward, and sometimes not at all. There's a security camera above your head. You can't see it move, but you know it's there, just a black circle in the ceiling, unblinking, watching. Now ask yourself, would you still be standing the way you are if it weren't? Would your hands be where they are? Would your face show the same expression? Most people adjust themselves, even slightly, when they think they're being watched. Straighten their posture, lower their voice, pick up trash they'd otherwise ignore. They perform for a presence that isn't actually doing anything, just watching. But what if it isn't even watching? What if the camera is fake? The unsettling thing is, it doesn't matter. The behavior still changes. Not because someone is watching, but because someone might be. That possibility is enough to reshape action, tone, impulse. Even a picture of eyes on a poster in a room can make people act more generously, more honestly, more morally. Not because they believe the eyes are real, not because they've been threatened or rewarded, but because something in them still reacts, still bends. You probably think of yourself as someone with stable values, someone whose actions come from principle or logic or emotion. But the reality is simpler. You act differently just because of a pair of eyes drawn with ink, printed on paper, taped to a wall. You don't notice it. You wouldn't admit it. But it happens. You could be in an empty room, alone, and behave better just because it feels like someone might be watching. The presence doesn't even need to exist. The suggestion is enough. Now ask yourself, what does that say about you? About how stable your moral compass really is? If your sense of right and wrong can be influenced by nothing more than a printed image, then how real are those values to begin with? Do you behave because you believe in behaving, or because you're afraid someone else might see you misbehave? And if it turns out that all it takes to change your actions is the illusion of being observed, then what's left when you're truly alone? What do you become when there are no eyes, real or imagined, watching? You might want to say that the presence of the eyes just reminds you of what's right, that it nudges you back toward your better self. But that only deepens the problem, because if the only thing keeping you aligned is a nudge, how steady were you in the first place? Maybe your behavior isn't shaped by inner conviction. Maybe it's shaped by feedback, by pressure, by the thin skin of social consequence. So then, who are you when those pressures vanish? What kind of person would you be in a world where no one ever sees what you do, where no one ever finds out, where no eyes, real, fake, imagined, can follow you? That's not a theoretical question, because most of your life, you already are alone. You already make most choices unseen. The moments when someone is watching are rare, fleeting, and yet you act as though they aren't, as though someone always might be. Why? What fear lives in you so deeply that even an artificial gaze makes you flinch? And what kind of morality is that? Is it morality at all? If you take the eyes away and your actions change, then what exactly were you doing in the first place? Were you being good, or were you just being watched? And if you don't know the difference, if the line between them is blurry and soft, then maybe the most disturbing part isn't that fake eyes change your behavior. It's that they reveal your behavior was never truly yours, not freely. It belonged to the idea that someone was watching, not to you. And if that idea can be planted with a picture, or a symbol, or a ceiling dome made of plastic, then how many of your choices, quiet, private, invisible, were never really yours at all? How much of your goodness is only obedience in disguise? And when the eyes disappear completely, finally, what disappears with them? You never see the world in real time. Everything you think you're experiencing right now is already over. Every movement you observe, every sound you hear, every feeling in your body, it's all delayed by milliseconds, sometimes more. Your brain is not a window to the present. It's a projection booth running slightly behind, stitching together fragments into something that looks seamless. But you don't notice, you never notice. And that should disturb you, because it means the world you think you're inhabiting isn't the one that exists. It's a reconstruction, a guess. Your brain buffers reality like a faulty stream, compensating for delays, gaps, inconsistencies, until you believe it's all happening exactly as it is. But it's not. Touch your hand to a surface. The moment you feel the contact, it's already happened. Light hits your eyes, sound hits your ears, but the processing takes time. Neural delays, signal transmission, cortical interpretation. Everything you sense has already passed. And the strange part is, your brain doesn't correct the lag by speeding things up. It doesn't show you the truth. It aligns everything to the slowest system. So the fastest signals wait for the slowest to catch up. Reality is held back to maintain the illusion of order. What you see isn't what is, it's what was, but polished, synchronized, rendered believable. You live inside a hallucination that runs slightly behind the world, and you never feel the gap that should scare you more than it does. Because if your sense of now is a guess, how do you ever know what's real? How do you trust any moment, any reaction, any experience? You're responding to a delay, choosing actions based on something that's already shifted, already done. And it's not just sensory, your thoughts lag too. By the time you become aware of a decision, your brain has often already made it. Studies show neural activity, predicting choices, seconds before you think you've chosen. So even your will, your sense of control, is a reconstruction. Your awareness is the final step, not the first. You believe you live in the present, act in the present, feel in the present, but you don't. You're always behind. You react to echoes. Interpretations. Your life is a constant game of catching up, but you never realize you're chasing something you can't reach. Now imagine someone else could see things just slightly faster than you, just a few milliseconds ahead. To you, they'd seem eerily predictive, always a step ahead, always in control. But they wouldn't be magical, They'd just be seeing your future before you do, because your future is already part of their present. And what does that make you? A person stuck in delay, living in a world already gone. Now pull back further. Think about how this delay compounds. A delay in sensation, a delay in thought, a delay in choice. You are never fully in sync with anything. Not the world, not others, not yourself. You're always slightly off, slightly late. It's subtle enough that you can live your life without noticing. But if you did notice, even once, it would break something. You'd realize that your entire existence is a best guess, that you never truly meet the world, only its residue. And maybe you're okay with that. Maybe the illusion is good enough. After all, what else do you have? You can't remove the delay. You can't see the world as it is. You can only hope your brain's version is close enough. But sometimes, late at night, you might feel it. That creeping lag. That sense that what you're experiencing isn't really now. That you're floating just behind a moment, catching shadows of something you'll never fully touch. And in that quiet space, you might wonder if you're always too late to the world. Then what part of you ever truly arrives? Maybe none of it does. Maybe you're not really living in time at all, just watching a replay you mistake for life. And maybe that's why silence feels so eerie, because in the absence of new input, your delay becomes more obvious. You feel the gap between sensation and awareness. You feel the distance between the world and your mind, and you start to realize that the delay isn't just a glitch. It's the only thing you've ever known. It's not a problem to be fixed. It's the foundation of your experience. But if everything you've ever seen, heard, touched, or felt came just after it happened, then when did you ever truly exist? Because if your life is delayed, your choice is delayed, your awareness delayed, maybe you were never really there at all. How do you explain a thought that appears before you've had it? Not a vague intuition or passing emotion, but a specific decision predicted by a machine with no soul. You haven't moved yet. You haven't spoken. You haven't even become aware of the thought. But in the next few seconds, you will. The machine already knows, and it's right. It isn't guessing. It's reading your brain, monitoring the tiny patterns of electrical activity that shape your intentions before you're even conscious of them. Patterns that appear not at the moment you decide, but moments before. 7 seconds, 10 seconds, sometimes more. Long enough to predict which button you'll press, which choice you'll make, which word you'll say. And that leaves you with a question you can't answer. If your thoughts can be seen coming before you think them, then what exactly are you? You've always believed you were the thinker, the source, the one who chooses, but the machine sees something else. It sees that the thought was coming long before your awareness caught up to it. The moment you believed you made a decision was just the final echo in a process that started invisibly, automatically. You were never in control. You were just watching it happen, mistaking observation for authorship. The discomfort comes slowly. First, the disbelief. Surely this isn't real. Surely those predictions were lucky, or shallow, or flawed. But then you learn the studies have been repeated, refined, confirmed, different labs, different methods. Always the same unsettling result. Thoughts aren't appearing from nothing. They're unfolding in ways that can be measured, seen, anticipated. Even choices you consider complex, whether to lie, whether to resist temptation, whether to speak, are built on processes that start long before you're aware of them. Chemical impulses, neural activations, predictable, decodable. You begin to wonder what part of your mind, if any, isn't mechanical. What's left of freedom when the path is visible before you walk it? The instinct is to resist, to insist that consciousness must matter, that awareness changes everything. But it doesn't, not in these experiments. The awareness comes too late, always too late. The thought is already in motion. The brain has already decided. The body has already prepared. And you are left watching yourself move. You think of all the times you've struggled to make a hard decision, agonized, hesitated, wrestled with conflicting values. But now you wonder if that inner struggle was just another layer of illusion, your brain playing out a drama it had already resolved, letting you feel involved, even though the outcome was already set. And here comes the contradiction. You still feel like you're choosing. You still feel the weight of responsibility. You still blame yourself when you fail and pride yourself when you succeed. But underneath it all, that feeling might just be another product of the machine, one more signal arising automatically, just like the rest. Even your guilt, your pride, your sense of self might be happening without you. And now the ground starts to shift. If you're not the author of your own thoughts, what are you? Are you just a witness, trapped inside a system that never needed you? Are you a passenger, watching the story unfold, believing you're writing it? Worse, are you just another output of the process? Not a person, not a self, but a side effect of computation. You might be tempted to dismiss all this, to argue that free will must exist, even if we don't fully understand it, that something in you, something essential, resists prediction. But can you point to it? Or are you clinging to the idea because the alternative is unbearable? Because if you truly accept this, then blame starts to dissolve. So does credit. So does justice. If people's thoughts are predictable before they have them, then crime, cruelty, kindness, love, all of it becomes automatic, inevitable. Not choices, but outcomes. You try to find a way back. Maybe you'll say prediction isn't certainty. Maybe it's just probability. But that only helps so much. If your mind can be read with 80% accuracy, 90%, even 95%, what kind of freedom is that? Freedom becomes a feeling, not a fact. You feel free because you don't see the chain. But the chain is there. The machine sees it. The moment it predicts your decision before you make it, something breaks, something you relied on, without even realizing it. You wonder if the feeling of choosing was always just that, a feeling, not an act, not a power, just a momentary impression, arising too late to matter. You want to reject this. You want to say no, but even your rejection, if it comes, is just another thought, unfolding in the same quiet, mechanical way. Maybe it's already begun. Maybe it's already written. And as you sit with that, a new discomfort emerges. Maybe the real fear isn't that you aren't free. Maybe the real fear is that you never were, and nothing has changed. The machine didn't take anything from you. It only showed you what was already true. That your thoughts were never yours, only echoes of a process too deep to see, too fast to stop, too quiet to question, until now. What if the feeling you've always called love was actually fear? Not consciously, not on the surface, but something deeper, something older, a kind of imprint carved into you when you were too young to understand it. The way a child clings to a parent who hurts them, the way you long for someone who once frightened you. This isn't romance, it isn't affection, it's survival, disguised as attachment. When love and fear arrive at the same time, over and over, the lines between them begin to blur. If someone tells you they care about you while also scaring you, controlling you, wounding you, your brain has to find a way to hold both truths. So it rewires itself. It creates a kind of fusion. Fear becomes familiar. Familiar becomes safe. And safe becomes love. It's not logical. It's biological. It's how trauma bonds form. Not because you're weak, but because your body is trying to keep you alive. When a person who threatens you also comforts you, your nervous system doesn't know what to do. It can't relax. It can't escape. So it adapts. It starts to associate the rush of stress, the racing heart, the tension, the alertness, with connection, with intimacy, with love. That's why some people feel drawn to those who hurt them, not because they enjoy pain, but because pain was once paired with care, because danger feels like home, because their sense of safety has been inverted. And here's the part that's harder to admit. You don't even need another person to recreate it. You can do it to yourself. You can chase relationships that feel unpredictable. You can ignore kindness because it feels boring. You can sabotage peace because your nervous system is looking for the thrill it was taught to need. You can call it chemistry, compatibility, passion, but it's just a reenactment, a repetition, a loop. You're not falling in love, you're being triggered, and it feels good, because that's what your brain decided love was. And maybe no one ever told you that. Maybe the first people you loved didn't know how to be safe. Maybe they were afraid too. Maybe they didn't mean to teach you this. But they did. So now, when someone yells or disappears or makes you question your worth, it feels familiar. It feels like connection. Not because it is, but because your brain linked those feelings long ago. And that bond is stubborn. It doesn't break just because you understand it. Sometimes understanding makes it even harder, because now you see the pattern. You name it, but it still pulls you. And sometimes you try to leave, but leaving safety, even warped safety, feels like danger. Your body panics. It begs you to go back, not because it's right, but because it's known. This is why trauma bonds are so strong. They don't depend on logic. They don't need compatibility. They just need repetition, intensity, confusion, and the illusion of love in the middle of fear. That's why it's not enough for someone to treat you well. If your body was taught to equate calm with threat, kindness won't feel soothing. It will feel suspicious, fake, untrustworthy. You'll start fights without meaning to. You'll test the other person's patience. You'll find ways to confirm the fear you secretly carry, that love is pain, that you aren't safe, that you have to earn what should be freely given. And worst of all, you might believe it's your fault, that you're too damaged, too needy, too intense. But you're not. You're just responding to what you learned. You're just repeating what you survived. You're just trying to feel close, using the only language your body remembers. And here's what's most disturbing. Even if you find real love, calm, steady, respectful love, it might not be enough to break the bond. Because that's not the love your body knows, and sometimes the body wins. Sometimes you'll walk away from someone safe to run back to someone who terrifies you, because the terror feels more intimate, because the chaos feels more alive, because the stillness of real love feels too foreign to trust. And you'll call it love. But it's not love, it's fear. Wearing the face of someone you once needed.